topics. So your pre-printed agenda still has item 1D. 1D is being deferred. So we will have 1A, 1B, and 1C. All the council is present. And our first item is dealing with Littleton Transportation Network, LTN, and an update for council. And I'm going to turn it over to City Clerk Wendy Hefner.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening. His name is Houston G. Tex. Quotes, Elam. We call him Tex, belovedly. He has always had a career that has been multi-tracked. While he was fully and actively employed as a professor and administrator, he remained active in volunteer projects. When he retired, he shifted his focus to additional volunteer leadership activities. He has served 4 years as chairman/president of the Denver Regional Mobility and Access Council for Dr. Mack. He served the city of Centennial as the coordinator of transportation and then the director of community mobile services from 2002 to 2008. Mayor Randy Fye declared December 15, 2009 Tex Elam Day in the city of Centennial. He has served on the southeast corridor of the I-25 MTA from 2002 to 2008, and he is currently the alternate representative for both non-RTD transit and senior issues on Dr. Cog's Transportation Advisory Committee. He's also a member of the RTD ADA Appeals Board, and he's in his third term as president for the Friends of the Colorado Talking Book Library. So you can see by his long list of accomplishments that he was the perfect person for shopping cart and omnibus to get in touch with. And he got in touch with me about 1.5 years ago and wanted to help. So I gladly accepted. So here's Tex Elam.
We'll try these. Thanks, Wendy. Can you folks hear?
Yes.
Great.
And Tex. Thank
Good.
you. And welcome.
Thank you, all of you. First thing we did was change the name. That is, we needed an umbrella name for the two different but related services. And so we came up with this name, which we think fits in every way, including the acronym, so LTN. What I plan to do here is provide you with the kind of information that's useful for you to make decisions, and to also, at the same time, help create a record on tape that we can use to introduce ourselves to other groups within the community. And we'll see how well it goes. You've all seen this about the upcoming silver tsunami, and those are, in my judgment, those are true figures. And if you leave them there, they're scary. But as a matter of fact, that's what we're about, is to help resolve that. So what this is me. And I'll use the approach because we believe that the city is over the center of the problem. We believe that the city is doing exactly the right things to make progress on resolving the kinds of impact that a changing population will have. Now, our city is unique in that we are a place where people stay. Every study that I've looked at says people stay here. Once they get here, they tend not to leave. The advantage is, of course, that we build a population that is interested in us, that is interested in all the various programs that we provide. It also means that we don't have the kinds of problems some communities have. There is, for instance, no group coming in to dominate the city. That is, they're not seniors moving in because we have such good services to therefore make the line very vertical. The school system continues healthy and successful and not having to build a whole bunch of new buildings for new populations. And the tweeners stay. And therefore, it makes for a healthy environment and one that we think will be useful for everybody concerned. Now, the purpose here is simply to introduce the fact that our presentation to other people shows some of the advantages of the city. Why not, you know? And so these do not require a great deal of energy and time on our part. But now we get to the fact that the transportation system, the transportation network. The person here is the person that makes the whole thing work. The other Wendy, is she here?
She's not, she's in Disneyland.
Oh, well, I don't blame her for the choice. And she just didn't know I was going to have that slide. Anyhow, this is the heart of the system. Wendy Shea-Tamig is the one who people call when they want service, is the one who schedules things, is the one who follows through with the drivers and such. And so her picture is at the right place here. The service is intended for seniors, and we say at age 55, and just so it's not of a concern, we could say 65, we could say 75. But believe me, nobody's going to use this service if they continue to drive, because it takes longer. I mean, if I'm taking a van, one of the omnibus vans, to go from near this area down to my eye doctor's, for instance, down on County Line, it can take me an hour to an hour and a half, because they have this habit of picking up other people for other purposes as they're delivering me to my appointment. That's the nature of the beast. It's terribly valuable, but it's not terribly quick. All right? The omnibus, the original program, which started in 1974, that's 40 years. This city was a pioneer, not surprisingly, but in fact a pioneer in providing special services for seniors who don't drive and for disabled people. And so it has two functions that it provides. Number one, it provides, and the key function is, it provides individual service, picking people up and taking them to where they need to go, then picking them up and bringing them home. And therefore, it's primarily used for doctors. It can be used for people to get haircuts and other things, and is used that way, but it's the kind of thing that seniors individually can use and disabled people can use who need special attention at a special time. In addition, however, it provides service to several fixed locations, as is noted here. One of our vans, as a matter of fact, and there are 4 vans that operate under this aegis. All 4 vans, first of all, have both 2 doors, one for regular people and one which is in fact a rising platform, so people who can't step up or people who are in wheelchairs have a way and access to or from the bus. It's a terribly valuable service to have such a purpose in. But we also have the Buck Recreation Center, which is awfully, awfully useful for seniors too. And therefore, one of the buses spends most of its time going back and forth on a scheduled basis. These are the omnibus, back and forth on a scheduled basis to the Buck Center. It also goes to Southwest Plaza and to the Kmart up the road. And it fills up the bus and fills up the service. The shopping cart, on the other hand, does not have individual appointments. It runs on a schedule, and we'll be handing out copies of the schedule, and you can look where you can pick it up and where it's going to take you any time of the day. And the shopping cart operates 6 days a week instead of 5, as the omnibus does. So seniors have a chance, and this is unique, the shopping cart is unique in the area, is to go shopping, you know, to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours at the location, and you'll know that how much time you're going to be able to spend there. So you not only go shopping, but you get a chance to get something to eat, you get a chance to chat with some friends, that you make an appointment with the friends to meet them there at the location. And so it's an awfully valuable, interesting experience that is unique in this city and in most. So now we have, next I want to go to the, we have presentations from 4 people, and with my vision, if I start to read those, I will make mistakes, so I'm displaying them, and after the meeting, we will hand you a copy of these 2, and then 2 more demonstrations of service quality. Oh, wait a minute, back up a minute. There you go. I mean, even I couldn't read that fast if I ever could read that fast. Okay, now we've talked about what LTN means to seniors, but just a moment to talk about what it means to the community. It means that seniors and disabled can shop in the area, can go to the museums, can go to Hudson Gardens, can go downtown here, can do things instead of being locked up. I don't know how often you think about it. I wouldn't think about it much, except that I had no choice but to think about it. I mean, how many of you drove here versus how many of you didn't drive and, like me, would be independent on finding a ride home? When you lose your driver's license, the world really changes. And if it wasn't for these services, believe me, it can be a very lonely situation. Luckily, that ain't the case. We've got all of these services provided here by these services, doing very well for us. All right? The organization has a history of saving money and being successful in being effective at low cost. As a matter of fact, as it pointed out in an earlier slide, which I didn't mention, there's no administrative cost. That's remarkable. So the $330,000 operates the whole system. They can't hear me. Well, let's see. At what point should I?
Just keep going.
Just keep going. All right.
Start over. No.
Yeah. Thank you. No.
Jerry said that, but he didn't mean it.
Yeah, I figured that. But we have a history of being effective financially, as well as being effective operationally. I mean, the person in charge of the system is the city clerk. You'd have a city clerk whether this was operational or not. And therefore, the accountant could figure out, let's see, 17.3% of time is spent doing this. But other than that, there's no cost there. And the lady that I mentioned earlier, the other Wendy, and by the way, you need to be a Wendy to be paid to be operating this service, like 2 positions with Wendy. She also is the city receptionist. She'd be the city receptionist if she didn't have the other burden or opportunity. And by the way, our surveys, and we are taking surveys, think that she's terrific. I agree with those surveys, but the point is that that's what the riders think, is that she's doing a very good job. And we are planning for the future. That is, we're trying to look at those things which need to be looked at if, in fact, there's going to be a larger population of seniors that have to be served. And so we're spending a lot of our time and energy looking into that and trying to be effective at making those things happen at minimal or reduced cost. One of the things that we're looking at is that we now have an administrative advisory committee. We have an advisory committee, and they're the brains. I'm the one who's up here, but we'll get to their brains in just a minute. Our mission is straightforward. That is, we want to advise the city of Littleton regarding senior and disabled people's transportation needs. We want to provide guidance to the community's evolving transportation situation, and we want to help secure funding to offset, to the extent that we can, the cost of doing so. I'm afraid that doesn't mean that there's going to be no cost, because we wouldn't be able to do that, but we're working at it, and we're making progress on it. All right, now the first year, which was last year, the first committee meeting was May of last year, so it's virtually 1 year. And what we did all of the policy stuff. We created criteria for what we wanted to do, how to do it, when we should do it, and we developed missions and policies and programs, and surveyed riders to see what they thought of the system and where they would like to go. That provided a lot of information that we will use in a little while to see if we should modify any of the routes that we're taking or how we could serve them better. And we are working hard at also exposing ourselves and the service that we render more broadly than has thus far been the case. So this year, we're looking at additional things. We're going to take advantage of the 40th year business. I mean, why not, because that's astonishing that you people started that long ago. We're going to be celebrating civic champions. We're working at getting people to know about us, to be interested in what we're doing, to pay attention to the fact that this is a very valuable situation for us. We want to make sure that we work heavily at analyzing where we are going and why we are going there. We are working, as a matter of fact, on a logo. And we will work that out within the next couple of weeks. And to have as an example of exposure, to have an increase visibility in the Western Welcome Week parade. We were there last year in a minor way. We were just getting organized. This year we're going to try and have people, as the parade goes by, notice that this is a service provided by the city for seniors. And we're looking forward to that. Now, it's about time I introduced the brains of the organization. I'd like to introduce, let's see, the reason I have the list is if I forget one, you know how that works, all right? So I'd like to introduce Susan Thornton, Ann Burnham, Linda Haley, Mike Bratton, Wendy, the other Wendy you heard about, she's in another better location in Disneyland. And
There's no better location, Ted.
well, that's true. A temporary diversion location, but a nice one to be in, but expensive. And Hugh Hillary, who also he's also in California, but he's playing around with grandchildren and such. So, and lastly, but hardly least, is Karen Hart, who has been our research associate for the last year. She's the one who's gotten and verified the statistics. She's been my major resource and our major resource in our development of presentations and the like. So we're awfully pleased about all of that. Now, having done that, I'd like to ask Dan if he would come forward. Dan has a presentation that he'd like to make on behalf of the committee.
Good evening, Council. I was really excited to get on this committee a year ago because I, for the last 35 years, had watched the benefits of Omnibus and Shopping Cart. So as part of what we did, South Metro Housing Options helped and sponsored a fundraiser last July, our first annual spaghetti supper. We are also doing that this July. And Mayor Cernanik, if you'll come forward. We have a check for $8,000 to help benefit the omnibus and the shopping cart.
It's a big check.
So, are you going to say more?
I am going to say just a couple things more. Our next fundraiser is July 25th at the Libbey-Bortz Assisted Living Center. We have 100 tickets that are $25 each. We're also selling sponsorships this year, which we've already sold 3 gold sponsors at $500. So we hope to do more than that in 2014. So,
Very good.
thank you.
Dan, what are the the gold sponsors? What's involved?
The gold sponsorship is $500.
Yeah.
We have a silver sponsorship for $250 and a bronze for $100. And with the gold sponsorship, you get a table at the dinner.
Okay.
And you also have a table that you can put advertising materials and that type of thing on.
Good.
So
And where can they find that information if they didn't write down all the
I
notes?
believe Wendy is going to have that at the front desk.
Okay, sounds very good. Thank you all for this, and thank you for recognizing the need in the community and what will be a growing portion of our population. I think I've now seen it 6 times over, right, Tex?
Right.
As far as the way the demographics are going. So thank you very much, and thank you for your continued interest in the community, sir.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
It's not going to fit your ball.
I would also like to announce the people who formed the committee were the 2 Wendys and me. I didn't become a Wendy, but, I was part of it.
Anyway.
Yeah, there you go. We decided that this was a good time to tell our Karen that we now welcome her as a full-time member of the committee, full service, and we're very pleased about that. Any questions? We can go to it's already on there, so any questions?
No.
I have maybe a comment, if nothing else. A while back, when King Soopers were planning to close down for a bit, for about a year, I was able to talk to one of the Wendy's, well, both Wendy's, actually, and they were able to work with the organization to make sure that there are people over near King Soopers that needed transportation, that it would at least be made available. So I appreciate Wendy for taking care of that, so thank you.
They really do a good job. They, as one who uses the system, I can tell you that it works well, and that's a good example of an adjustment. Now, some of the people, just so you know what they had to put up with, there is a King Soopers much closer than the one down on Mineral, over here just in Inglewood. And a lot of seniors thought, well, why don't you go there? And so they and we on the committee said, well, we are sponsored happily and luckily by the city. And so we try our best to serve the community as well as we serve the community members. And in fact, though there was some grumbling, there wasn't any major grumbling, and there certainly wasn't any reduction in the number of people who rode. Yeah.
Tex, if I could just make a comment. Over the years, you've had some wonderful drivers for both of these vehicles. They've gone out of their way to help people in very memorable and important ways, and it's just worth mentioning.
It is, and that's right. I mean, once we get a driver, they stay. And they stay because they like doing it, and we like they're doing it. And so we don't have turnover, which with this kind of organization would be a problem, because you have to want to get out of the bus and help the people to get on, whether, you know, and all of those kinds of things. So thank you for the comment. Anything else? Well, then let me close by one observation, which is we were talking about the upcoming spaghetti dinner and therefore the older spaghetti dinner. And I got to tell you, one of the prideful things for all of us was their pride at the Libby Bork Center to have us there. It was important to them, and they felt really good about it and made sure that we all understood that they felt good about it. How can you beat that as a reference? Mayor?
Well, thank you very much, Tex, and appreciate what the committee has done, and look for seeing how the survey and information gets integrated with suggestions for the future as well.
Thank you.
We're closing the doors, so now you can't leave. Come on, Peg, how you doing? Always been around since 4.
I only knew that because that's when I graduated from college, and I had heard that date before, so that's how. When they went down 6-1, I thought it was like all over. And then they came back and made it.
Came back, made it close. That was good. They gave a good effort.
That's good. So. Okay.
Thank you, appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, we will see you, Dan. Thank you. That was his promise. Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Okay, Council, next up is our design presentation for the downtown district branding and signage. And Denise Stevens is going to introduce our speaker on this.
Good evening, Council. Can you hear me okay? You know, I think we all know that we have differing opinions about things, and it all comes from a real love of this city. But one thing I think we can all agree on is that the downtown area is a real jewel, and we even recognize it as an economic engine in the economic plan. And so we're looking to make a really great thing even better with this downtown branding. And council was wise enough to kind of underscore their support of this when you said we could go ahead with the pursuit of a downtown branding and sign plan. So just to give you a brief background on this, back in February, we put out an RFP to cover this project, and we got in 12 very good responses that the advisory committee had reduced down to 5, again, very excellent contractors, and we called those people in for a presentation. And that presentation was made before our advisory committee, and hands down, they all decided that the best choice was Kristen Cipher with C+B Designs. And she's done an amazing job of following a very tight timeline. And just to, her bio's in front of you, but I just want to highlight a couple of things. As the founder and owner of C+B Design, Kristen has over 20 years of experience in landscape architecture, urban design, and planning, with a focus on improving downtown public spaces. And more importantly, Kristen is respected for her inspiring approach to project development, including developing public improvement plans, leading and facilitating public outreach efforts, researching and writing planning and design documents, creating presentations, and developing design ideas through freehand sketching and modeling. Kristen is passionate about public planning and design and brings this focus and awareness into every project. And this explains one of the reasons that the advisory committee picked Kristen, was that she was the one presenter who actually did a lot of research specifically for Littleton and presented on that. So I'd like to introduce her now. Kristen Cipher with C+B Designs.
Thank you. Should I use this microphone? Would that be best?
I think that's best.
It's for the people at home.
Is it? It's dangerous to give me a microphone. I feel like I'm doing karaoke. Hi, I'm Kristen Cipher with C+B Design.
Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to present this evening. I'm going to give you a slice of where we are in the project. I brought banners. I don't know if you can see those throughout the room, but I brought banners that indicate our conceptual ABC options. Also some destination locations. Those are existing places in the downtown that we would like to point people to. And then draft signage locations for new signs in the downtown. I've also brought a project overview banner, but the presentation is going to provide an overview of the project. So I'd like to present, but I'd also like to address questions while we're going through. So if anyone has a question, if you would just raise your hand, I'd be happy to address it as we're working through the presentation. So some background on me, really quickly. I am an urban designer and a planner. I do a lot of signage and wayfinding design, but I also do a lot of downtown planning and design. And I think one of the reasons why I was picked for this project is because not only am I designing signs, but I'm designing them contextually and looking at urban design features that would help support the signage environment. So some of the places that I've worked in the past are also historic downtowns throughout Colorado. This is Old Town Arvada. This is signage and wayfinding as art in Avon, Colorado. It's Main Street in Avon, which is going to be a new street in Avon, Colorado. This is the Broadway streetscape in Eagle, Colorado. In Colorado, we find that main streets are of two conditions. One, your main street is a state highway, and so you've got all that traffic going through, or your main street is a deliberate turn off of a state highway. And guess which one downtown Littleton is? It's the deliberate turn, which means that you need to catch people's eye as they are on that major arterial, which is Santa Fe Drive, and get them to turn into downtown. Encourage them to see downtown as a destination and to make that choice to turn off the major highway. I also do streetscape work, and one of the things that I always think about when I'm designing signs is their context with the rest of the streetscape, the other furnishings, the lighting, the trash, the things that are maybe invisible in the streetscape but have to be accommodated along with the signage and wayfinding. I've also worked in a lot of communities near you. So I've worked in Englewood, Colorado, where I did their downtown plan and their Complete Streets project, looking at public space and how to get around in the town. And then one of the things that I do recently is I work on Colorado Creative Districts. So the Creative District Program is a new designation in the state of Colorado. Communities have to apply to become a creative district. And then there's funds and money available to think about how to encourage creativity and art within a downtown environment. A lot of those are very tactical urbanism. I'll just touch on that briefly tonight, but that is basically doing things at a grassroots level to improve your downtown. This is Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Does anyone recognize this? So when we think about signage and wayfinding, it's good to think about non-traditional ways of creating memorable experiences and helping to orient people. So funky things like this are often not a direct line project for a signage and wayfinding plan, but they are something that we talk to the community about and we think about when we think about public art. And one of the things that we've proposed for this project is public art in the gateway areas. And I'll explain where those are, but gateways are areas where you're entering downtown in general. And so public art in those spaces is a way of making a memorable experience and again, catching people's eye as they're passing through. And lighting. I think lighting is often overlooked as a way of creating place, and Littleton, of course, has the lights in the trees. I'm looking at you, Charlie. Littleton has the lights in the trees, which are an enormous commitment from the city, but very memorable, one of the experiences that people really think about when they think about downtown Littleton. So when we look about signage and gateways and orientation, we kind of take a broad picture look first. We sort of say, how do you enter, how do you get around? Littleton is not just a main street, it is also Alamo Street, it is side streets, and those side streets extend for several blocks. So when we think about downtown, although Main Street is the first street that comes to mind, we have a district of merchants, of property owners, of business owners that are also off of Main Street. And then we also have to think about nighttime and daytime. This is for Ralston Fields in Arvada, Colorado, and this is what it looks like at night. So when we think about signage and wayfinding, we like to think about it as a 24-hour experience, because downtown, this is like a spoiler, so this is coming up, but over 70% of shopping happens after 6 p.m. So we really want to think about that downtown retail environment and how enlivened it is at night and how accessible it is for those people who are shopping. And this is in Fort Collins, Colorado, along the College Avenue corridor, the 3-mile block just south of the Old Town. This is signage and wayfinding for that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the ability to extend signage and wayfinding into the palette of things like benches, trash. You have some existing benches and trash, and part of my scope is to make recommendations for how they could be updated to better reflect the character and brand of downtown Littleton. So long-term project, but something that we're considering in this effort, as well as materiality, things like tree grates and what are, in addition to concrete, are there any other materials on the streetscape itself that would help set the tone for downtown? Oh, and it's 80% of visitor spending. I was wrong! So it's 80%, that's even better, isn't it? You can tell I'm not a math girl, I'm a design girl. So 80% of visitor spending takes place in a pedestrian-focused, intimate setting, and 70% happens after 6 p.m. So when you think about economic development and downtowns, you have to think about the fact that the retail environment, that walkable, interconnected downtown, is really your economic driver, and that you are really working in your best interest to have a shop open at night so that people can shop during the time that they're spending the majority of their money. So I did mention that I'm working on the Creative District program. That involves some kind of funky, not to scare you off, but benches for Trinidad that are shaped like hearts. So you can find your heart, it's Corazon de Trinidad. You can have a big funky bench. It's a photo op in the age of like Facebook and selfies. Experiences like this are really a memorable way to encourage people to take a picture and be reminded of the importance of being downtown. And then quickly to summarize my experience, growing up, I moved over 10 times as a child. And certain downtowns and certain places resonated with me, and others, I felt like they could be better. And that drive for understanding authentic place and then using it to create designs for downtowns is the thing that has grown my practice and grown my professional career. So when we think about downtown, although it's a small part of a community, it is the heart of a community, which means that it has to resonate. It has to promise a memorable experience that is unique and that reflects the community spirit, the community culture, and the community population. So when we think about downtown, we often think about events, or we think about that shopping trip. But we also want to encourage people who have never been there to figure out how to get around and what downtown points to. So if it's the heart of the community, it points to a lot of resources that are directly adjacent, but may be invisible if you don't have a way to figure out how to get there. So signage is really twofold. It's celebratory, but it's also directional and informational. All right, so that's me. So let's talk about the project. So the project scope and goals, we're going to do some new signage and wayfinding elements. We're also going to do those gateway elements, those entry pieces that aren't necessarily a sign. I'm loath to use this, but I'm going to try. Oh, it works. Okay, so if you look at these preliminary design options, the gateways are those areas where we've got the existing brick planters and what can go in them. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sign that says Downtown Shopping District. It can be an art piece that alludes to the character, the quality, the culture of Littleton. So the ones that I've got so far are a very literal sign, but then also a sculpture piece that's done in a transparent material. This is called Freeform. It's graffiti proof, which means it's a matte finish, but you can sand it and it continues to be matte, which is really nice because sometimes graffiti happens, intentionally or otherwise. And that art piece would be a way of blending colors, creating something really vibrant that as people are driving on Santa Fe, they don't necessarily have to see that it says downtown, nor do they often have the time to read something when they're going that fast. So what you want to do is say that symbol equals downtown and start to get that vocabulary in the minds of people. And in the same way, what did someone tell me this looked like? A solar panel. It's not, although that would be cool. It's a kinetic sculpture and it looks like folded curtains. So it's a ball-bearing joint, which means that as the wind pushes one little piece, it pulls the next one along with it to create a wave-like pattern. And I've done it in a yellow and red coloring so that it matches up with the City of Littleton colors. So not a solar panel, don't believe the lies. It's a kinetic sculpture. And that's what these little pictures at the bottom actually allude to. Okay, so then we're also going to do a downtown brand and tagline, including brand experiences. So I think one of the struggles that people have with a downtown is not that they don't want to go downtown, but they don't have that packaged experience that encourages them to wake up Saturday morning, ride their bike on the Mary Carter Greenway Trail, catch the Littles Creek Trail, head into downtown, have breakfast at Toast, do some shopping, and then bike home. That's a really encapsulated experience that makes a lot of sense, but you have to market those to your community. You can't always assume that people are going to understand how to use downtown. So we want to build on what's good about downtown. Think about capturing those marketing experiences that are the day-to-day money generators, not just the big festivals and events. Because often if you're a retailer, those big festivals and events are a net negative that day. It's not the easiest selling day for you as a retailer. The retailers really look at the general, everyday spending money to build that kind of repertoire between them and their customer. Then we're also going to be looking at banner graphics. You've got the It's Spring banner graphics. We're going to make those banner graphics work harder for you so that you're promoting a message that is unique to downtown, that is rotated and catches people's eyes. And then the urban design and streetscape elements, that's the benches and trash. And the urban design elements, which also includes lighting. So we're going to promote something that is a distinct identity for downtown Littleton. These were the tasks that I was given at the very beginning of the project. All about identity, visitor awareness, especially for major transportation arteries. 60,000 cars a day on Santa Fe Boulevard are a tremendous marketing opportunity for downtown Littleton. Make sure that it's easy to navigate downtown to find desired destinations. For many years, I will out myself, I lived in Littleton. I was a Littleton resident for years and years and years. And we had an exchange student from Arapahoe Community College. And one day I said to him, where do you have lunch when you go downtown? Because he and his cousins and brothers would eat lunch every day. They ate lunch at McDonald's. And when I said, well, have you ever been to downtown Littleton? He said, what? Like, downtown, what are you talking about? And Arapahoe Community College is a stone's throw away from downtown. It is so walkable, the relationship between those two places. But the student body is not aware of downtown. And they really don't have a great destination or route to get them easily, safely. Well, that's not true. They do, but it's not easy to see. It's not easy to understand. It's not laid out for them in the physical environment so they can get there. So when we think about being a resident, it's so obvious that downtown exists, all the little shops that we like that are our favorite. We get that, but not everyone sees it that way. We're also going to look for this success and market potential for retail, building the idea of economic development in the downtown by allowing people to see that you're putting in public space improvements. That's a real investment yay flag for people who are thinking of locating their business in downtown Littleton. The fact that you are putting money in, especially in the incubator areas, and your incubator areas aren't often Main Street, they're your side streets, they're your Alamo Street. That's where the rents are cheaper, and that's where people are able to be entry point level into the downtown. And then that's tied to economic growth and redevelopment. So where we are in the timeline is we've gone through this process of outreach to the community, gathering important ideas, and then coming up with design concepts and preliminary locations. So we haven't figured out the final design, and I wanted to get your opinions and perspectives as council and as city people, if that's the right way to capture everybody in the audience people, about the design ideas. So we've gone through this understanding of existing conditions. This is where I was out in the street really looking at what exists, doing this document review of what plans and things are already on the books, already been vetted with the community that shape what I can do for signage and wayfinding, and then the physical conditions of the street. Also the destinations, where are we trying to get people to go? There's been a lot of work that's already done in regard to this, but it was helpful to go out and say, okay, where can we walk to? Where can we get to from downtown? And then what signs are needed? This is the graphic, the banner graphic that is over here, which is really taking the categories of signage and saying, where do we need to put a sign? Where is a good place? And it looks like a lot of dots, but a lot of these are very small signage pieces and not grand gateway or pedestrian auto signs. We've also been gathering some staff perspectives. You have a wonderful staff at the City of Littleton, many of whom have been here for a very long time. They have a deep history with what has happened, what works, what doesn't work. That staff walk where we really looked at existing conditions and talked about maintenance and talked about financing and also talked about what has happened and what's worked in the past was really important for me. Then we came up with the preliminary design options ABC, and then we started taking them out to the community. So for stakeholder outreach, we really started with the ladies only sample tour. That was a fun event. So I brought the signage placard of shame with me tonight. So that has been worn by myself and my staff for the last couple of months as we go out and talk to people about the project and do this kind of intercept survey. So ladies only sample tour, the goal was to ask them as a captured group, often that comes from far away, where they came from, have they been to downtown Littleton before, do they know that there are businesses beyond Main Street, do they know where to park, do they have any difficulty finding things? And it was amazing to me, what came out of this survey is that anyone who's not from Littleton had no idea how to get around, had no idea that there were shops beyond Main Street, sometimes didn't even know that there were shops the whole length of Main Street, so the whole way down to the melting pot. We're not aware that that was part of the downtown district. So we also heard a lot of positive things, this, especially as the evening wore on and the drinking seemed to be wearing on, about how much people love Littleton. If they had a mic, there was a lot of like, I love Littleton. I've lived here for 60 years. So
was Nate Mark that was doing that?
It was actually really heartfelt. So, I mean, for the majority of it, I actually wore the sign of shame. And what I found is that when I got the survey results home, the same things were reflected in what people said, is that they're deeply attached to Littleton. They raise their family in Littleton. They want their grandkids to live in Littleton and grow up in Littleton. So, and also they want to attract new people. Even the older folks were like, what we need are new people, so that it's not just all of us as time marches on. We've also done the Stern Park, there's me with the banner. So we did the Stern Park meet and greet. This was kind of a piggybacking on an existing event. At this time, we actually had the ABC options, so we were able to get people's feedback on what they liked and what they don't like. More importantly, what they felt attached to and what they didn't. We're seeing a lot of attachment to different parts of different pieces. So things about A that people really love, things about B that people really love, things about C that people really love. My job as a designer from this point forward is to take all those perspectives and loves and create the D option, the one that you don't see, that is a combination of everything that people like about the three that we've put out so far. We've also had banner and survey comment stations at the rec center, the library, and the town hall arts center. Now these were paper surveys, but we also provided a link to an online survey, but the number reflects the paper surveys that we've received. And again, you know, as you go through these, what you realize is that people took their time, they gave their perspective, they're very attached to downtown, they're very encouraged by this project, and they want to make sure it reflects the community that they feel is their home. We've also done openlittleton.org. As of like 4 p.m. today, we had 115 visitors and 31 priority lists, so that's online. You can kind of see that what we're getting overall, I think that this is really important to point out, is that most of our responses, regardless of whether they're online, paper, intercept survey, are in that 60 to 69 age group by far. So I don't know if that just means that everybody who's 60 to 69 is like out and about all the time, but we're seeing a strong correlation between age and survey response. Facebook is the same kind of age group, also the same kind of voting comments. We're getting a lot of really good feedback on the nuance of the different designs, and again, perspectives on what people like and what they don't like. And then the merchant one-on-one conversations. So these have been going really well. I think that when we originally scoped the project, we had decided we were just going to do a big meeting with the merchants, and then we felt that one-on-one conversations would just be more fruitful and get more information. So they are, and they do. So I'm learning a lot. I'm also spending a lot of extra money in Littleton, because invariably we have the chats, and then I have to shop at the shop because it's lovely and there's some really beautiful stuff. But overall, what I'm hearing from merchants is that they want this signage and wayfinding program to work for them, to provide some capital and some traction to get people into the downtown, make them aware of how to get around in the downtown, and particularly if you're a side street business or a business that's set back from the street, have this signage and wayfinding program help work for them to show that there's a way to get around and it's not just Main Street alone. And then there's also design preferences. A lot of merchants are creatives and entrepreneurs, and they have lots of good ideas. So they've been a nice way of mining that resource as well. So when we talk to merchants, we're asking them about their business, operating hours, type of clientele, how big of a bubble they draw from. Then how do people get to their business? Do they complain about not being able to park? Do they have parking associated with their business? And then the signage and wayfinding, their preferences, their ideas, their concerns. So overall, we've had 441 preferences to date. We've had 305 paper surveys, 31 priority lists on openlittleton.org, and 111 voting comments on facebook.com. So this is pretty good response. Honestly, I work in a lot of communities. I'm really taken aback. This is about 3 times what I normally see for a signage wayfinding project. So I'm very, very pleased with the amount of comments and response that we've gotten. And again, this is an update, which means that a lot of these things like openlittleton.org and the Facebook page are up right now. And so they're still gleaning comments as we speak. And then here, I wanted to call this out again, just to show that the 60 and over crowd is your biggest voice within the community as far as this survey is concerned.
Well, that's
Go
a
ahead.
much bigger age group than the 10-year blocks otherwise, though.
Yes.
So if you combined just a couple of those, you'd,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you'd
Yeah, you get as big a group. That's correct. So if you took, for example, the 50 to 59 and the 40 to 49, you'd be getting a much bigger group than the 60 and over. So, yeah, 60 and over, I have a grandmother who's 96, so you can capture a huge swath of the population. But I'm just impressed that that many people over 60 voted and participated. I was actually worried about capturing that voice, but I needn't have worried because I've heard that voice loud and clear. So next steps, I'm in the process of revising the design options to create something that is, again, that sort of mixture of all three, the good parts and the bad parts. And this is the part that I really enjoy the most, honestly. It's easy to come up with three polarized options. It's a lot more challenging and interesting to take them and find something that is agreeable to all. So that is the process that I am right in the weeds with right now. And then I'm also reviewing and refining the signage locations with our working group. So we have a working group comprised of staff that helps me understand, again, where maintenance problems exist, where they know signs need to go, where they may have concerns about signs going. So the draft signage location map that you see has draft all over it because staff is seeing it for the first time tonight too. So it is draft, draft, draft. So we're going to be looking at that and digging into that this week and the next. And then we also need to create some additional secondary and tertiary signs. So each of these dots represents a different type of sign. And you can see from the three options, we've done the biggest and the boldest. So we've done sort of the largest and the smallest, and they're in between pieces that point to things like trails and parks that would muddy the waters as far as people making a choice between A, B, and C, but are now part of my responsibility as a designer to go back and make sure that we've got that level of granularity. So we got some additional merchant one-on-one meetings this week. I suspect that we're probably going to continue that into next week too. I'm hopeful that the merchants have their Wednesday meeting next Wednesday in the morning, and I'd like to go and present at that meeting too, just so I can capture some of the people who may not have time for a one-on-one. Then we're going to be doing a downtown walking tour this Thursday, where we look at existing conditions and we talk with people who are interested about what they think is working, what is not working. And then
And council, that's a reminder to wear comfortable shoes.
It is, or not. You know, sometimes you can really tell how walkable your downtown is by wearing non-comfortable footwear. That's just my excuse for wearing non-comfortable footwear. But then we're going to have our technical assistance team meeting. That's a little bit broader swath of staff and people who are helping us think about the final design. Then we're going to come back to City Council on the 10th with the sort of D option, and not only the D option, but some preliminary costs and implementation strategies. And then we're going to meet this week or beginning of next week with South Suburban Parks and Rec. I want to meet with ACC to see if we can begin to forge that relationship. And then I've had a phone conversation with the Colorado Center for the Blind, but I'd like to go to their facility and talk to them a little bit about the people that they have who use the downtown so often, and just make sure that we're servicing their needs as best we can, because there are lots of creative ways to incorporate people who have visibility issues, making the downtown environment more accessible and interactive for them. So that's a meeting I'm looking forward to. And then we're also going to be looking at some funky outreach, some tactical urbanism ideas. We're not just going to look at formal signs, but we're also going to look at things like pop-up shops, and we're going to look at pop-up civic forums, food carts, reclaimed setbacks. All of these words basically equal things like this. If you've ever seen yarn bombing, it's where you take something in the physical environment and you yarn bomb it. You put yarn all over it. So this is like yarn bombing in the extreme. But the way I've seen this used is you can do like a little knitted cozy for a park bench that also advertises a knitting shop or a textile shop. They can have a really useful purpose. And then it's also a way of bringing community engagement into downtown. So if you think about having dinner in a vacant lot or in the alleys or on a side street as a community potluck, it's not something that changes the physical environment long term, but it is a signage wayfinding event that I consider to be within my scope. Also looking at the idea of taking like a parking lot that maybe the bank parking lot that doesn't have a lot of traffic after hours. And I would encourage that to be a shared parking lot, but in lieu of that, having an event there at night that captures the crowd that's coming off the RTD station and wants to do something funky and fun. And then this idea of pop-up shops. There are a couple, not very many, vacant storefronts in the downtown. A pop-up shop is where you have a shop that's open for a month, maybe 2 months at the most. And it often isn't just one shop that occupies the space. It's maybe all of those side street businesses and those off-main businesses, those home businesses in your community of makers. There are quite a few Etsy people who live in Littleton who sell their wares, who might really welcome the opportunity to have 2 months' worth of visibility on Main Street for their products. And especially off-Main businesses, that would be a tremendous opportunity for them to get their products out so that people can see them who are walking Main. And it's a pop-up shop, which means it pops up and then it pops and it goes away. So it's not a forever shop, and it's a great way of utilizing vacant storefronts on a temporary way until they're occupied by permanent tenants. And then the other kind of non-permanent ideas that we have are things like taking over a parking space and using it for an outdoor seating area. So you can have a place to have dinner, you can have a library space here, you can have a museum exhibit here, and it's a way of saying in areas where parking is, if you're willing to give up a parking spot, which is really the big if, you can do something funky that puts an idea right out in the physical environment, and it's intriguing. It's intriguing for folks, and it's often really useful for businesses too. And then you'll probably see in my bio that I teach piano on Saturday mornings, so I have a bias toward pianos. But this idea of creating something that's interactive and playful in places like Biga Park or in front of the Town Hall Arts Center, to enliven the streetscape, to create something really engaging for people that is whimsical and fun and participatory. Participatory for all levels. So I'm thinking specifically about the Town Hall Arts Center, and then I'm thinking about the sweet shop on the corner. And I'm thinking about like my little students that would love to come and like do a chick-chick-ching on the piano on their way to and from the car or to and from their bike. So I have this tactical urbanism plan, and I'm going to be working with staff to fill it out so we can figure out what is a good fit. I'd also like to bring this to the merchant group, but I haven't cleared that with anybody. So, spoilers. So I'm going to think about taking it to the merchant group as well, because usually merchants are a very inspiring bunch, and they will grab onto these ideas, and then they somehow find the resources to make them happen through human capital, which is really all that you need for tactical urbanism is human capital. So what ideas do you like best, and what locations are the best place for them? So final document, I just wanted to give you guys a heads up about what that looks like. So it's going to include the final signage designs, their locations, how much they're going to cost, this documentation of the process that we went through to get to these final signage designs, and then the palette. All the little circles that have all the different colors will have a sign associated with them. And then how we're going to implement and maintain them is really important too. So that funding piece, if we don't have the money to fund them all at once, which ones go in first? How does that work? What happens to the signs every year? What happens if someone tags this material with graffiti? I held this material up and didn't explain it at all, so I'm sorry. So everywhere that you see a color that has transparency on options A and B, it's this kind of a material. And I'll pass it around because it's fun, I think, to have a little tactical experience. So really that's all I have. I have the designs, and I'm happy to answer questions, take comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I've been really encouraged by the participation I've gotten from the community so far. So if you have any questions about that too, that'd be great.
Council, go around the table, see if questions. Peggy?
So this is incredible, so I say that first. But I had thought with the wayfinding, I don't know where my brain was, that this was going to be, geez, I want to eat, where are the eating places? And I thought then, and I want to do whatever, and where's that?
Yes.
As you have in, like, I shouldn't mention this, but anyway, at Castle Rock, at the big outlet down there, they have these boards, and it says dining places. The only problem is that to keep it current, because
Right.
places come and go, you know, it's tough to have a really spiffy design like this that would have all that. So I thought somehow in my head there would be some electronic place, locations that would just be updated. You could push dining places or whatever, and they would pop up on a certain list or whatever. So
Yes.
I just was wondering about that kind of thing.
Well, that's huge for merchants, and it's also huge for visitors. So I've addressed it in two ways. And it's Peggy. Is it
Yeah.
Peggy? Okay, good. I'm bad with names. So, and I have my glasses on, but, okay. So the idea is that I've got a QR code, so we can do this in such a way that if you have a mobile device, right? You can scan the QR code. It provides a directory of everything that's in the downtown, sorted by what you're looking for. It can also provide coupons, like if you're a merchant, you can have a coupon on that site. So I would envision that being hosted through the existing merchant site or the city site. You could also do a separate third site, but I think that's somewhat confusing for people. So keeping within the architecture of what you've got, I'd love to see that mobile piece. And then there's also a map piece that's associated with the signage that I've done. And it's mostly destinations. It's not really for businesses, but it could be. Although my experience designing signage and wayfinding is exactly yours. So if you have a directory and it goes up, 10 minutes later, there's a new business or there's a business that hasn't, you know, made it, and so they're not, the directory is not useful anymore. And more importantly, if your business name is like Razzmatazz, people have no idea what that is. Is it like sweets? Is it clothes? Is it games? I have no clue. So to be able to search by the type of business and have it come up under those categories is so much more useful. So the way I've designed it,
So if you-
QR code.
If you do that, is there a way to, like some of the places downtown are a lot more expensive than others in terms of eateries? All the way from, maybe McDonald's is the cheapest, but, which is on the fringe of downtown. So that could indicate some kind of high, medium, low, by a color or something?
Yeah, well, the thing is, when you have that QR code piece, it's a double link. So you'll see the directory, and then you'll see, like, these are all the restaurants. And you can have, like, little dollar signs. That's what I would recommend,
Okay,
something that's
okay.
not super specific and doesn't discourage people. But then the other powerful thing about that is you can then link directly to the website of that, in this case, restaurant. And often restaurants do have their menus online, their specials online. So it's a nice way of clicking through as someone who's navigating in a moment of repose to figure out where to go and what to do.
Thank you.
Bruce Beckman, questions?
Hi, thank you. One comment that you had mentioned to me, and you briefly said it tonight, is part of your surveying technique here is what you call three polarizing choices.
Correct.
They are each out in a little bit in left field.
They're very,
And they-
yes.
And could you
polarized.
talk about that for just a moment so that those people that are seeing these for the first time understand that?
That's a great point. Okay, so yes, when we do a polarized option, that just means that stylistically, not necessarily from an information standpoint, but from a look and a feel standpoint, we're doing something that's very different for each. So option A, we call our traditional option at the office, but it's building on the cupola and the history of downtown Littleton, the architecture. It's very traditional in that form. Can I walk? Can I walk over here? Okay. So in this way, we've got a long, tall piece. It's cast aluminum or steel, which means that each of these pieces, as they separate, are very crisp, and they can have that kind of reveal like a molding. So it overall feels, in its overall architecture, very traditional. However, because it does have this clear material embedded within it, I felt like that was the nod to modernism for this piece. And because it can be in any color of the rainbow, and it can also have texture or historic photos embedded within it, I felt like that was the way to kind of take option A, make sure that you're capturing like the current modern way that Littleton is moving to. So it's nod to history, but it's also nod to modern. But overall, it's meant to be a more traditional look and feel. Option B is meant to be a transitional piece. So if you look at option C is the most modern, option B is taking this material, this clear material, and utilizing it in such a way that it calls attention to important information. So in this case, it's a destination sign. So here the destination would be like town hall. So this would be like a town hall sign, but here this would be a town hall sign, and it has an acid etched historic photo, which means that in this steel piece, it has acid that reveals a historic photo almost like a black and white. And it's the majority of the panel actually has that historic photo in it. Then we also put in an electronic LED panel as an option for this one, which means that if this is in front of Town Hall Arts Center, you could have the latest show that would actually show up here. You could advertise for festivals and events. These are pretty spendy, so I think that they should be used judiciously. The one that I've specified is actually a black background with white, so it's not like, I think people think of those LEDs like red and blinky lights. It's nothing like that. It's very refined, but it does exist only on this kind of size of panel. And then from the art piece standpoint, you start to see how this modernity gets kind of mixed up and done in a way that is much more whimsical and artistic, as opposed to the historic downtown Littleton sign, which is very traditional and utilizes words. The other thing, oh, and I got burned on this online. So there is no East Main, and Charlie burned me too. So there's only West Main. But these signs are actually meant to replace the green signs that you see. They're often really up high on the light poles. And so just like Wheat Ridge and other Colorado communities that have used those signs that people see as mostly regulatory to actually work in your behalf so that you're marketing downtown with those signs too. And you know when you enter, because that's a really big graphic change that is inexpensive and subtle but powerful. So West Main, here we're taking sort of the swoopy of the new logo for all of Littleton and applying that to the signage piece. And then this pole is also internally illuminated. So where it says East Main Street, that would be backlit, and at night you'd be able to see it. And you'd have side lights on this color piece. So at nighttime, it actually pushes light through that material and it glows really effectively. So at night, you'd see all these colors as glowing elements. And that really pushes the modernity up on this piece as well. And then for concept C, it's bent steel. And so if you kind of look at the side view, you can see how the steel bends, and the color is actually on the inside, which means that you only perceive that color as you're walking by or as you are moving along the street. So I've done the punch of the little swoopy-doo, and you'll see it as yellow if you're looking at the sign straight on, but it's actually just a punch if you look at it from the side. And so it can be punched in yellow or red. It could be punched in any color, but yellow and red are really the City of Littleton colors. And so you start to see how this translates down through the vocabulary and utilizing more of a gray blend for the street sign. And then again, not a solar panel, but a wavy art piece that moves. So a lot of people like kinetic sculptures as gateway elements, and I thought that that was one way of doing that piece. I haven't heard a real strong preference for gateway. I've heard as much I love B as I love C as I love A. So what we may end up with in regard to gateways is actually a secondary, a secondary and a tertiary kind of application. We might do a little bit of all of these, if that's not too crazy. We'll find out, because I haven't done it yet. But if you guys have a strong preference, I'd love to hear that too, since one of the reasons for me being here tonight is not just information sharing, but hopefully getting some perspectives.
Bruce Tallman.
Comment and a question. I like the idea of doing something more active with respect to, for example, Bega Park. And then there's a plaza at the other end of Main Street next to the melting pot.
Yes.
Which is
underutilized.
Man,
I'm going to put words in your mouth.
Being charitable. But there certainly is upside opportunity to utilize those spaces more proactively in order to, you a couple times used sort of the word whimsical, and those types of areas, they're neat areas, they're there for a purpose, but certainly taking advantage of those spaces. Biga, to a large extent, is something people cut through to get to the RTD.
Oh, absolutely. Like
and-
hundreds of people every day.
Yeah, exactly, and so it's not really place in its own right, it's just transition.
Well, right now.
That's what I meant, yeah.
So I love the idea of storytelling in those places. Littleton has a deep, rich history, a lot of which is tangible in the downtown.
Right.
So when you think about storytelling, you think about that breadcrumb experience of, here's kind of one historic event, then the next, then the next, then the next. And so you can get a sense of that as you are walking through a space. So really looking at that for Biga. At the other end, it feels more like a destination, a little bit more like an underutilized space.
Yeah. The fountain doesn't work, or at
Nope.
least presently, it doesn't seem to work, and it's just, I don't know what you do there, but certainly that area seems to have some opportunity for, a different type of use.
Well, and the Carnegie Library, which is the melting pot, is
Right.
a great historic resource. But for both of those spaces, what's really missing beyond signage, beyond anything else, is programming. So think about Biga Park, and then think about the Buck Recreation Center having yoga in the park every day, having a reading group in the park every day. Like, making sure that the design accommodates active use will just completely change that space. And I feel the same, the melting pot space kind of there at the other end, it's just not programmed at all.
No.
People don't know what to do there, and they're not encouraged to use it.
Right.
It's also got some physical challenges because it's right adjacent to Santa Fe.
Right.
However, if you're standing there in the defunct fountain, it's pretty quiet. You'd be surprised with the big sacred trees.
Yeah.
Because I made the mistake of being like, so do the trees have to stay? They do. So you don't want to get rid of the trees, but they do occupy the space there, and they hide it. So you have to think about, how do you program it, how do you design it in such a way that you keep the trees, you keep the seclusion, but you don't make it feel like an unsafe, underutilized space.
The question I wanted to ask was, if we're there's a lot of information, you identified a variety of locations for this, for the signage and so forth and so on.
Yes.
And there's a lot of information associated with the signs, not just the QR codes, but so forth and so on. Is there, definitely a neat project, but how do we incorporate it in a way that draws attention to it when there's so much other stuff that's out there in the same space? How do we either declutter what's already there, or are we just going to add more in that nobody's going to pay attention to because it's too cluttered to begin with?
I hear this a lot for downtown streetscapes. So as a person who's coming in from the outside, I can say that the biggest clutter piece, and I think the reason that people perceive downtown Littleton as cluttered, is because the trees are in the middle of the sidewalk in certain places, and it's a visual barrier. You don't have that experience of being able to sort of see the whole way down the street unobstructed in the walking area, which we perceive as kind of that middle ground between the buildings and the parking, right? So, but there's not a lot else in the physical space. There are not enough benches. There's enough trash. There are not enough planters. And there's certainly not enough signs to tell you where to get around. So what we want to do is create a palette that is a strong palette, that is a memorable palette, that builds on itself. So when you think about signs, that's why I am dipping a toe into recommendations for benches, for trash, for planter pots, and how to maintain them too. So the thing that makes a place look cluttered is like your house when it looks cluttered, when it's full of a bunch of things that don't have a strong design theme. I'm a designer, so my house is really anal, right? But you want to have a house, and you want to have a space that feels like it's got a palette and a theme to it, in which case then all those pieces and parts fit in together really well. It's not like, oh, here's this random juniper planted area, and like right across the street, there's a bunch of big rocks in that same space. And it starts to feel like cacophony in your head and in your visual environment. So we want to create something that's a lot more organized, a lot more easy to maintain, because we've got a similar palette going on. And then the signage and wayfinding, I would hope, would be the cap to that, that's really the sparkle that calls people's attention. Like if you're looking at a hierarchy, I would want them to look at the signage and wayfinding darn near first. And part of the color palette is not just Littleton's colors, but the idea of creating something that is very eye-catching and pulls people's visual perspective to the signs so that they can use them for their intended purpose.
Okay, thanks.
And Kristen, so we can wrap by 8, so that's the
Okay,
guide.
7
Okay,
minutes.
so
I'll talk faster.
Cool.
Or less.
Go real quick then. So thank you, very good presentation, appreciate it. So and now you are working with the downtown merchants then, and maybe it's for Denise as well. Are you also working with the Fine Arts Board at all? You mentioned some artwork in there somehow.
I talked to the Fine Arts Board when I put, we had a conversation when I put the banners up, because someone from the Fine Arts Board was actually at the Town Hall Arts Center. But I think it's a good idea to outreach to them as we get to this place, especially with the gateway piece, because it is more of an art piece. And then we have to accommodate some art pieces too. So the Year of Sundays piece that's as you're like entering downtown from your west and or east and heading west. There's a sculpture that's already in that brick planter. I would envision leaving that there. It has some legibility issues because the sculpture is green and the backdrop is green. So like recommending some plantings that actually create some backdrop for that so it's legible would be my recommendation. But yeah, I think that's a really good point.
I think signage, like the old malls that used to have the index of businesses, where to go, you are here type thing, that'll be a great thing. Also, I'm always advocating for Broadway and Littleton Boulevard as being a gateway into downtown, heading
Yes.
west. So I would love to see something that far up from downtown, like arch something. You know, I'm always, you know, I always talk about that.
No,
Like to
you're
see
right.
something like that, because we're talking about another 100 businesses before you get
heavens,
to
yeah.
downtown. So you got a lot. So with that in mind, have you given any consideration about expanding this whole focus along, up the hill, say, toward Broadway?
Yes and no. So particularly before I got the project, I did a lot of reconnaissance of like, where do these planners exist? How are people getting to downtown? What's like the bigger Littleton picture of signage and wayfinding? So I do understand what you're saying in regard to Broadway and have photographs of, you know, the brick planters and this physical space. There's space there to advertise, to put a sign, to point to downtown. The goal of this project is to promote the downtown core, the football shape, and make it unique and memorable. So the idea would be that if we choose a sign palette, you would want it to be unique to downtown, but you could build on it so that it becomes a little bit different in the rest of downtown, but still is, you know, again, not a bunch of clutter. It all goes together from a signage perspective.
Yeah, I'd almost like to see like the high-low and the low-low, you know, up the hill there, because there's many historical buildings even just up by the courthouse.
There are.
We should be focusing on that as well.
Yeah, and Littleton Boulevard is, like, once it comes back together and it's Littleton Boulevard, that is really your spine to so many resources within the community. So it's a very critical arterial. So yes, I agree with you.
Andy?
Well, I've had the pleasure of meeting in some of the task groups, so I don't have much to ask other than to reinforce what we talked about, which is incorporating not only with South Suburban, but the South Platte Working Group with Councilmember Brinkman has been leading the charge in, drawing people up from the bike path, as you discussed. And that's, I think, really the jewel of downtown, that's adjacent to downtown, and the interplay between the two, I think, is really exciting.
Yes, I agree. Having just talked to the surf shop guy too, who was like, geez, we need to really celebrate the river. It's, you know, before the flooding, the river actually ran very close to downtown, and that kind of oxbow shape was created for flood control. So it used to be a lot more visible, but I think making that connection at least along the trail, which is what we're doing.
Thank you.
Ed?
Great process. I think you're very inclusive. Bruce really asked my questions. I don't have any questions.
Well, again, thank you guys for the opportunity. If you have any other questions, I'll leave my card so you can call me or contact me.
Great.
And I'll
And thank
see
you,
you
Kristen. We'll see you again on
Good
June
Thursday.
10th.
Yeah, thanks.
5 minutes.
Okay, so council, 5-minute break, and then we'll get to Dr. Brown. Brower. thank you for keeping your one question to only 3.
I went right through.
I know. I understand.
Did not do a pen. I know, as soon as you said this, get everybody 8 out there, that would make it real.
I was just, thank you for not saying,
That's okay with me.
detracting or whatever. Just trying to do my job.
And you did well.
Council, could we take our seats, please?
It's a little bell.
Is Dr. Brown ready? Who's going to introduce her?
Oh, so let my-
All right, sure. We'll leave it up to him.
I don't think, well, wait a minute. I don't think that
Well, Bruce, I'm glad that I can get that stuff out of my car tomorrow now. I thought I was gonna have it in there for another week.
Yeah. Yeah, good call.
Yeah.
Yeah, what time do you go by? 8 o'clock, or you can do it in the afternoon, or whatever you want to do.
Carrying this big box of stuff Well, I'll be at that meeting, so I can go straight a little bit. They already hate me anyway, so that's fine. Charlotte.
Oh, I was wrong. We're not quite ready.
Oh, my phone.
No, that's hers.
Oh, that's a senior.
Did it go around the room?
No, it didn't.
Yeah, why don't you send it around?
That
Oh, thanks a lot.
piece of glass that was up
Did you
there.
see it? No. Well, you have to stay late.
See what?
It was pretty cool, though.
Awesome.
Oh, you're talking about the
Yeah,
cellular?
translucent,
I know.
space age material. Yeah. Yeah, you can see it when it's on the street.
Rub up against it.
Yeah. So, oh yeah, that is pretty cool.
If only I'd known.
Something that's been in the movies for a while. This is really fun.
Sometimes instant gratification isn't all it's about.
Ready, fire.
I ran into Bill Clifford, Notre Dame grad. And I said, "Oh." He knew who you were. I said, "Oh."
You could be up.
The Notre Dame.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
There are, we have at least 10 or 12 grads in the city,
Please.
at least, that I know of. I'm trying to think. Well, they have Denver Club, so, yeah.
He lives just outside of Rockville.
I'm, later this month, one of them is in, like, the University Hills Rotary Club, and I'm making a presentation. But he lives in Littleton.
This Bill, I think, is like a hall.
Quick introduction, Dr. Jimmy Brower from Nicoletti Flatter Associates.
Okay, and I'm going to stop you for a second. Pick up one of the microphones or the one off the table.
Oh, that one? Okay.
And speak into the microphone.
Semblance check, 2, check. So Dr. Jamie Brower from Nicoletti Flatter and Associates. Dr. Brower was asked to come in tonight and talk to you briefly about conducting safe meetings. I know in any public forum, there's been some concerns and some questions raised about when people's emotions get escalated in meetings, whether it's planning board or council or whatever. What are some of the things we can do, or what are some of the signs we can look for? And Dr. Brower and Nicoletti Flatter have a good program on this, and she'll present an overview of that for you guys tonight. So, Dr. Brower.
Thank you. All right.
So Dr. Brower, does everyone have to be a doctor to be a part of Nicoletti Flatter?
Interesting. No, they don't have to. Most of them happen to be, but they don't have to. And Nicoletti Flatter, John, obviously I'm not John. I'm a more feminine version of John Nicoletti. He couldn't make it. John is actually in Texas, and so he's going to be, he's out of town for this one, but he will be presenting, you were telling me, at CML. Okay, so he will be presenting there, and it'll be the fuller version of this, so you'll get a bigger picture then. Tonight I don't want to keep you forever. I don't want anybody to fall asleep or drool, so we'll keep it about an hour, and we'll go through it.
You look like droolers.
Oh, no, sir. No drooling. I may, though. I've been up since 4. So, but what I'm going to cover today, really, we kind of, John asked me to come and he asked me to talk about some of the tips for conducting a safe meeting, but more importantly, also taking a look at kind of the bigger picture of some of the workplace violence and some of the things that we've seen, particularly in Colorado. I've actually worked with John for 13 years. I was first his clinical director, and then I moved into being his training coordinator, and we actually work in a slightly different world. Most of the time we work with law enforcement. I'm married to law enforcement, but our world is much more death and destruction, and I joke a little bit that I'm more of a death and destruction psychologist than I am a fuzzy bunny rainbow psychologist. So it's a little bit different take. Our world is truly on the far aspect of things. So we will talk about a couple of the incidents that we've experienced, some of the things that we've gone through in Colorado, because there have been a lot, quite a few anyway. But we're also going to talk about some of the strategic pieces of kind of pulling it all together so we can all be safer. And some of these ideas, too, on safety are going to go to the Colorado Chiefs of Police conference that's coming up here, too, in June, and we're going to start talking about how do we keep our communities safer. So that'll be coming, too. Now, I'm going to do a 1-2, skip a few, so you're going to have to hang with me because we're going to pull a 2-3 hour presentation into an hour, so hang with me. Really what we're talking about is Avenger-related violent incidents in Colorado. I'm going to hit a couple of the high notes here, a couple of them that have occurred. And I'm sure you've all seen, too, what just recently happened in California, Santa Barbara, with that shooting. And that was an unfortunate one. Did anybody watch the online video of that? Very disturbing, yeah. Unfortunately, law enforcement had some contact with them. One of the biggest things that we're seeing now, more so than ever before, is that with some of the folks where we go and we do a threat assessment, because we do threat assessments and risk assessments for community members, college campuses, businesses all over the country. But what we are seeing is that, unfortunately, we end up doing mental health evaluations, where in some cases we don't need to be doing the mental health evaluation, we actually need to be doing a threat assessment, which is different. It's a little bit different. And so people can present very well. In fact, many of them will have no identified mental health conditions whatsoever, or they will have a mental health condition which does not correlate with violence. So we'll end up seeing some of that, but we won't do the threat assessment. What behaviors, what things do we actually need to look at? What do we need to analyze? What are some of the precursors that we really need to be paying attention to? Whether there's a mental health condition or not, what are the telltales? So I'm going to talk about some of those. You're going to see some of those in some of these incidents. December of 2013, 16-year-old shooter entered a local high school armed with a shotgun. Do you guys remember this situation?
Absolutely.
Shooter shot 2 students, killing one before turning the weapon on himself. Greenwood Village. Remember this one? 52-year-old man had been fired from a local bank for harassing a 25-year-old female coworker, went to her parking garage and shot and killed her, turning the gun on himself. Denver resident, October, 65-year-old resident shot and killed the manager of a retirement home before turning the gun on himself.
And there are more and more. This one, 24-year-old man recently withdrawn from a doctoral program, University of Denver. This one was horrific, the Aurora Theater shooting. We responded with law enforcement to that one, spent 3 days of about 20 hours each day working the debriefs and the death notifications following that incident. It was horrific. But these are the things that we're seeing, and we're seeing lots of them, and it's not just in Colorado. And I will say, truth be told, that a lot of our violent incidents, if you kind of take a look at violence overall, it's actually decreasing. Generally speaking, we're a little bit safer, we're a little bit better. The problem is that when we do have an act of violence, it's bigger. The death toll is higher, and now we learn about it because our technological advances are significant. In many situations, technology, it's actually already released all the information about the incident before sometimes the chiefs and the sheriffs and anybody else even knows about it. It's already been out and distributed across the country. So we hear much more so about the violent acts that are going on across the country. Do you guys remember the Boulder elk shooting? Do you remember that one? Mm-hmm. That one went out, the chief had no idea, chiefs and sheriffs had no idea what had even occurred because it had already gone out through media, Twitter and Facebook and everything else, and then they found out about it. But it had already been spent throughout the country. I did a conference on the East Coast, and they all knew about the elk. So they were asking me, why do we shoot elk? And I said, because they're yummy, which I know for some it's wrong. But we have a bunch of these. So, and we could go through incidents forever. Now, Aspen, Colorado, this is an interesting one. 72-year-old former resident of Aspen, James Blanning, who was bitter over its transformation into a playground for the rich, left 4 gift-wrapped bombs downtown in a bank robbery attempt. The bombs were made of gasoline and cell phone parts and came with notes warning of mass death. The suspect shot and killed himself a short time later. You guys remember hearing about this? You hear about that? Aspen warning signs. Blanning left a typewritten note at a local newspaper office. So we've got notes ahead of time. The profanity-laced note, which appeared to match those that Blanning left at banks, said Aspen will pay a horrible price in blood if his demands were not met. On the outside of the envelope containing the note was Blanning's handwritten last will and testament, which is another piece of the puzzle. The note also said a 5th bomb was hidden in a high-end watering hole. Lynn said Aspen bars had been searched, but that no additional bomb was discovered. So do you see some of the precursors? And I'm going to talk about some of the precursors and some of the things that we can see and that we have seen and why we need to focus on some of those and pay attention. Colorado Springs, the Arvada, this one was the church shooting, the multiple church shooting that started in Arvada and ended down south. Bailey, do you guys remember Bailey? Granby, remember this one? Yeah, Granby was incredible. 52-year-old male built a homemade tank out of a bulldozer fortified with steel plates and mounted rifles, plows through 5 businesses in town before shooting himself. And in this one, here are some of the warning signs. Reportedly had a grudge with town officials and was not happy with some of the recent zoning decisions. Recently sued the owner of the town cement plant over a land dispute and lost. Local resident said he's a person who had a business here in the county and was put out of business, so I think he's just got some vengeance with the town. Do you see that vengeance piece and that sense of a mission and that sense of I've been done wrong? And that actually can be the beginning of the development of some of this stuff. And there are more pieces to the puzzle. A couple of things we do want to consider. When we look at violent incidents, John divides them up into pre-event threshold. Pre-event, this is what you do before the person gets on your radar. This is pre-event prevention type things that maybe the city does or engages in. What do you guys engage in currently to prevent folks from getting on the radar, acting up, becoming hostile or volatile in meetings or within the city limits? What do you do to prevent some of that? So those are things you can think of. What do we do for our pre-event items? Event threshold, what do you do when the person gets on your radar? And on your radar means they've engaged in a behavior that now puts them in your head a little bit. Like, yep, now I've got somebody who maybe has a little bit of vengeance, who maybe has verbalized their irritation with the city, who maybe has behaved in a way that's slightly concerning, or maybe who just raises the hair on the back of our neck. They are on our radar. We are aware of them. We're paying attention to them now, and we're actually going to watch consequent behaviors. We actually want to begin our behavioral analysis when they come on our radar. Event horizon is when the person actually is attacking you. This is during the attack. That's what we call an event horizon. And the post horizon is what you do to recover and live with what happened. This is oftentimes the cleanup phase or the recovery, the debriefing, things like that. So all of those phases need to ultimately be considered. One thing we really want to try to get away from, and we're actually doing a great job of it in schools, we're not so good yet in some of our businesses. Welcome to It Could Never Happen Here, USA. You know, we look at a spectrum of a lot of different things, and I'm from Iowa, where really nothing bad ever does happen, yet even. Well, actually, there's been a few shootings, but having that belief in many ways actually makes us feel safe. It actually makes us feel like things are great here, and a little bit of denial can be healthy. A lot of denial, or denial when you're in an open workspace where people have open access to you, can create opportunity and time for folks to get to you. And really, we need to start developing stronger safety plans so that we can keep ourselves and others safe. We like to think that when we do our threat and violence stuff, and I teach safety and self-defense classes, and we do a whole bunch of things, when we talk about safety, we talk on large spectrums. Where on one end of the spectrum, we have Pollyanna, it could never happen here, and on the other end of the spectrum, we have paranoia, where we're completely paranoid and we're scared about everything that's going on. And what we like to think is that in the middle there's a third place, and that's called preparation. We've prepared for it. We've thought it out. We've mitigated issues that have come up, and we've taken steps to make sure that we're safe. We've taken our precautions for everything that's come on our radar. And even for some of the stuff that hasn't. We're actually preventing. We're doing lots of work. But in the middle is preparation. And when we're prepared, we're actually not scared. So the goal is to have this level of preparation where we're talking about stuff before it happens, not after, when we then have to clean it up and it's a big mess. So when we prepare, we're not scared. Similar to, you know, in our schools now, we do lockdown procedures. Those of you who have kids, are they doing lockdown stuff where they're locking people down? Yeah, and you know what, actually when we've tried to bring that notion into businesses and we've tried to think about how can we stay safe in our businesses, adults get more freaked out by that than kids do. It's like a fire drill, right? How many of you have run fire drills with your kids? Or how many of you wear your seatbelt when you get in your vehicle? Everyone raise your hand, law enforcement in the back, right? So yeah, we wear our seatbelts and we do fire drills. Are we terrified every time we run a fire drill or we slip on our seatbelt? No, we're prepared. And it becomes part of our habit. It's a safety habit. So that's a lot of what we want to start doing, and kind of identifying some of those things for your board, identifying things for meetings, identifying things for your communities are actually really important. How can we make those part of our safety habits so that we don't end up here? Here's another one. Here's the paranoia. Attention, we interrupt this emergency breaking news bulletin with an even scarier emergency breaking news bulletin. And I know that the media loves to do that, but we don't want to go there either. So, detection phase. Pre-event, let me go back this way. Actually, I'm going to skip right here. Categories of risk. Here's what we look at when we look at categories of risk. And when we do a risk or threat assessment, and I don't know if Nicoletti, has John come and done any risk or threat assessments for you guys? For the most part, things have been probably pretty smooth. What we do is we look for several different things. One is called a risk for proactive attack behaviors. Proactive means that we have some evidence that an individual is actually planning outside proactively. Before they engage in an act of violence, they have a premeditated plan. They've decided how they're going to do it and with what they're going to use as their method of destruction or weapon of choice, typically. But that's proactive violence. What you guys may actually see more so are the latter two. The second one is what we call reactive attack behaviors. Reactive attack behaviors come after a triggering event, typically. And the triggering event can be disagreeing with someone, it can be cutting them off, it can be setting limits or boundaries, it can be a lot of different things, but what happens is you'll notice very reactive behavior to it. And reactive above and beyond their baseline behavior. One of the things, you know, when we train law enforcement and we train folks throughout the country, we really talk about communication and de-escalation skills and noticing when somebody is starting to edge up. We always take a look at baseline behavior. If you have somebody who's speaking, watch their baseline behavior. That's going to be the initial presence of how they are. Are they sweating? Are they, clasping their fists? Are they biting their lips? Are they angry? What are you seeing? A lot of pacing, lots of movement. Watch the baseline. And then see what happens. Has anybody ever accidentally triggered someone and you can clearly see the reactive behavior? What kind of reactive behavior do you see sometimes?
Change of expression.
Change of expression. You bet.
Pretty hostile voice, suddenly.
Hostile voice. The tone will shift. What else can you hear or see?
Making fists and embracing.
Making fists, embracing, which is a big one. That's huge.
To themselves.
Yes. Talking to themselves or muttering underneath their breath. Sometimes engaging in face saving. If you tell them time's up, or if you put a limit on somebody, sometimes people, when they go to walk away or when they disengage, they'll actually try to save face. Kids do that. If you send them to their room, what do they do all the way to their room? Yeah, there's stuff coming out. And then they slam the door, right? And what will happen is people will actually, particularly sometimes when you shut them down or when they go to amp up following a trigger, is that you'll see them actually stage for you their emotional state. So when you see staging begin, that's also that's a bump up in the game. And staging is that you may not be understanding what I'm saying or how I'm feeling. In fact, you may not agree with me, but I'm going to show you how I feel. Redundancy is another way that people begin to start kind of being overcome by intrusive ideation. Have you ever had people repeat themselves just over and over again? Maybe slightly different, but it's the same thing, just in a different way. That redundancy can also be an issue, because they don't feel heard, and so they're actually going to amp up and keep saying it over and over again until somebody acknowledges the emotional state. So you can actually see chronic redundancy. Those are reactive attack behaviors, the reactiveness. Now, it can be attacking toward people, but it can also be attacking toward property. Have you ever seen anybody slam anything or push something away or kick a chair or run into something, but they're actually bumping into something after being activated? That can be the attack behavior. Then we also have a category that we call social and psychological disruption. Social and psychological disruption is something you may see probably most frequently. Those are the most frequent when we do threat and risk assessments. That's what we see all the time. And we may see that they're not proactive and they're not really reactive, but they know just enough to actually make things psychologically and socially uncomfortable. They're the folks who, and I'm trying to think of a good example in your guys' setting. And even with who you work with in any setting, truthfully, these are the bullies. Does that make sense? People who bully and push people around or try to intimidate or harass or are just generally speaking rather rude. It can be those folks. That's socially and psychologically disruptive. People who stand over other people and speak to them or at them. That's social and psychologically disruptive. So those types of behaviors. Can you guys think of any that you've seen or witnessed or experienced, and not just here, but just anywhere in life? Yeah.
The stare down.
Yes, beautiful. The stare down. That's a good one. Yep, when people eyeball you and hold it. Absolutely. Which is confrontation in any animal species. What other ones? Can you think of anything else?
Well, threats that they make that they later say, well, I wasn't threatening you. What I was meaning was this.
Right. You bet. The veiled threats. Yeah. And veiled threats are tricky because they will mean what they mean. There is a true threat there, but we either let it go and we'll say, well, that's just so-and-so being so-and-so, or we allow them to talk their way out of it. And in our world of violence prevention, we actually, if they air it, we believe it. And if they throw it out there, then it's now up to them to prove that they didn't mean it. It's not up to us to then say, well, no, you really meant that. No, if you air it, we're actually going to trust you because we've had far too many violent incidents happen and people end up hurt. And I'd rather be wrong and have you removed and have things calm down than have myself be wrong and have something happen in here where we lose life. But those are good ones. Those are good ones. Now, who are the attackers? You have two different kinds, insiders and outsiders. Insiders, individuals who are on your radar before they attack. These are the folks who are common to you. You know them. They've actually demonstrated some escalation in their behavior. They're on the radar. They've already engaged in behavior that's somewhat concerning. Those are the ones you're aware of. And those, really, as irritating as they may be and as difficult as it is to kind of handle folks who are insiders, at least we know them. At least I can put a face to you, and at least I can watch you, and at least I can track some of your behavior. Outsiders are very difficult. Those are the ones you will not know about, and they will not be on your radar. Those are the ones who will walk into a meeting and they're here because of who knows what. You have no prior knowledge of them. They are not on your radar. Some of them may actually not even be here for a meeting or anything else. Maybe they're coming to speak to somebody who's actually in the audience. That can be an outsider. Or waiting outside for someone who's in here. Those can be outsiders. Specifically, who are they? Sometimes it can be staff, ex-employees, citizens, family members, ex-family members, contractors, and others. All of those can be insiders or outsiders. Some of our personality categories of folks that we will be dealing with. Delightful folks, that's good. Task-oriented folks. These folks don't caress anything, but they're just going to get down to business. So they're not necessarily super polite, they don't have all of that, but they're very task-oriented, goal-oriented, and in some situations, that's probably good. Let's skip through the mud, just lay it out, let's get to it. Then we also have PIBs. And PIBs in our world are what we call pain in the butts, right? They're not necessarily violent, but they're irritating. They're the people when you say, hey, how you doing? They actually tell you, right? You had those people? Usually easy to defeat, though. You just say hi and keep moving. You don't actually engage them in conversation if you don't have to. Then we have a whole nother category. The secondary category is truly the folks who we then consider as disruptive, volatile, and potentially violent. And those categories, those can switch out real quick once we hit that secondary level there. Today's focus is going to be on that level. So some of our behavioral coding options. This is important. We code people. When we get behaviors, when we get folks in, we really look at behaviors. And I'm going to talk about that as we go too. But we code things. We code it as a normal behavior. And normal is normal for your environment, which means it's what you've accepted and tolerated. It's what's customary for this environment. And normal in this environment may not be normal at the library, or normal in the law enforcement world, or normal at a football game. But normal is what's normal for this environment. So we want to watch normal behaviors. The other thing is most people will try to mesh into what is normal. So if the status quo here is we're very respectful, we get up, say our piece, everybody gets to speak and they get to have their voice, generally those would be normal behaviors. When you see somebody outside of that normal realm, what are you learning? Uh-oh. Okay, radar. On our radar now. Boundary probing behaviors. More than likely that individual is engaged in boundary probing. Boundary probing, those of you who do have kids, their middle name is probably boundary probe. But boundary probing is truly when folks will actually push on what's acceptable to see what your response will be. And it can be anything. It can be little boundary probes, it can be great big boundary probes. But that's how we decide how much we can get away with. And I'm going to talk about letting boundary probes go and what the consequences are if you let a boundary probe go unaddressed, because there are significant consequences to that, particularly for folks who tend to do bad or have a desire to do bad. Then we have attack-related behaviors. Attack-related behaviors are the close to but not quite attacks. They can be verbal, they can be the bullying, they can be the stare down. Those are attack-related behaviors. Attack behaviors are physical, and that's them actually coming and attacking you. Or destroying property. Can be either or. Normal behaviors must be defined according to the environment, the individual, and the event. Remember those? Boundary probing, pushing rules, regulation, and tolerance levels. You may have to correct somebody 3-4 times, and they'll actually keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing to see if you're going to do anything bigger or not. But those are boundary probing behaviors. Purpose is to determine how much they can get away with. Here's the biggest issue about boundary probing, and this is the most important. If you allow a boundary probe to occur without a disruptor, then by default, that behavior becomes normal. So if you have somebody who boundary probes and you let it go and say nothing, you've just made it okay. You have inadvertently said that behavior is okay here, so carry on. So you have to be very careful about the boundary probes that you allow to continue.
Because you mean normal for that person and everybody else?
Yes, absolutely, especially in a community situation where you have folks who are all watching. And so we'll actually watch and see what one person can get away with, and then we'll actually pair it up and we'll engage as well. So it actually opens the door of normal behaviors and makes a lot of things normal, which is why some meetings can be incredibly out of control. Some meetings people can be talking over one another. Some meetings people can be disrespectful to one another because it's been allowed, and that becomes normal. When we go into an agency and whenever I do a risk assessment, I actually go through and I'll talk to people and I'll figure out what their culture's like and what normal is for them, because I don't want to ding a behavior or come down on a behavior that's actually normalized for that environment. And it really varies from working with cities and counties to working with construction and their industry. Very different industry. They can say and do things that you would not be able to do here, but normal for their environment. Important, if you only engage in observation of a boundary probe, then by default, you actually reinforce it. Remember, you're not only observing it, you actually then become a reinforcer. So the likelihood that they'll engage in more severe behavior is high. So we'll continue to crawl up that track. Attack-related behaviors. Now, these are interesting, and some of these we'll hear and we'll know. We already brought up threat-making, desensitization behaviors.
Could you back up to the other one?
Yeah.
So in conditioning, if I'm remembering
Yeah.
right, so if somebody does something and you ignore it, you're not reinforcing it at all. So it would seem to me it's a little complex of whether or not you just kind of let it go by and then they calm down on their own or whatever. So you have to look for real carefully at what's going on, I think.
Right, and there's two different realms that would fit, and that's a great point. So with conditioning, right, behavioral conditioning, what we know is that some behaviors we can actually ignore, and then cessation will happen. So the behavior will actually cease if we ignore it long enough, like temper tantrums. Some temper tantrums, if you ignore it long enough, they will finally stop. Or the minute you walk out of the room, they will quit crying and stand back up, and they're fine. Some of that can happen. What we're finding, unfortunately, though, in workplace violence and in situations community-type violence, is that ignoring the behavior actually is not making it go away. It actually increases the likelihood that they're going to come back with a stronger behavior because it was a boundary probe and they were actually testing you to see if you would stop them. And so if you don't stop some of the boundary probe behaviors in these types of settings, when it comes to violence, we don't want to use that in the violence world. Yeah, and the hard part is that sometimes you may think, well, geez, if I make a big deal out of the fact that, you know, they ran over their time and we tried to stop them and they talked over us anyway, or they, whatever it was, if we tried to make a big deal out of it, we're actually going to light them up. This could get worse. And so we'll actually kind of tiptoe around and we'll try to let it go and hope that they just go. But remember then that we just made that behavior okay. And if anything, we reinforced it and they may continue to carry on. They actually may continue to talk because you're not going to stop them. Yeah.
So I was thinking maybe more that you don't, Phil has done this really nice a few times.
Yeah.
So you just very calmly set,
Yes.
you know, a bar,
Yep.
you know, and don't engage.
Correct. Yep, and the nice part is that you guys have strict rules for the formality of how everything works. Use those, fall back on those and say, you know what, here's the deal. We actually need to follow our rules, and here's the rule, here's what we need to do, and in order to allow everyone to speak, here's what we're going to do. So we do need you to stop, and we're actually going to shut your microphone off, or we're going to move things along now. And you stay smooth, but set the boundary. And if they climb over it, I'm going to give you options for that too. But the initial confrontation, I think too, sometimes people think that if you confront somebody, it has to be nasty or mean or rude or somehow with equal power to whatever it is that they're presenting, and that's just not the case. You can actually be incredibly calm and incredibly professional and respectful while setting a very clear boundary. So absolutely, very good points. Now, with this, we want to look for attack-related behaviors, and some of these you guys will not have. The desensitization behaviors, threat-making is actually desensitization, and so we have to watch out, but dehumanization as well. Now, there's two pieces. Desensitization is desensitizing ourselves toward an act of violence. When people talk about engaging in violence or they throw out a threat, they're actually starting to desensitize the brain to actually engaging in that behavior. Much like we desensitize sometimes to making a major purchase, we'll actually think about it, we'll think about the expenditure, we'll research it forever, and we'll kind of work ourselves up to it, and then we finally go ahead and buy it. That's what I'm talking about. Folks who engage in acts of violence will actually desensitize by threat making in many ways. They also desensitize virtually online. Much of this you'll never see, but they do get online. They do view extreme death websites. They view all sorts of things to actually desensitize. If we showed you violence just in general in the United States, in the country, across the world, a violent movie from 50 years ago versus our violent movies now, or our video games even 20 years ago versus our video games now. Does anybody remember Pong? Right? And now what are they playing?
I'm still playing Pong.
It's good, good. Stay with Pong. Because now we have a whole bunch of things. We've got everything, and they're horrendous. They even have a really nasty Columbine game where you actually go and you shoot students. Yeah. So it's horrendous. And the violence is so actual that it really is desensitizing, especially if left kind of unbridled. And I'm not an anti-gaming person. I'm not horribly against gaming. It's just if left unbridled and not understanding what it does to your brain, then we can have some problems. The other end of that, and direct and conditional and veiled threats, you guys all know those. Direct is I'm going to shoot you, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to come back for you. Conditional is if you don't allow me this, then I'm going to do this. And veiled is I'd hate to see how many explosives it would take to blow up this building. But I'm just joking. No, really, I'm kidding. But that's veiled. It's not direct, it's actually snuck in there. Or how are your children? I know which school they go to, or I saw them in school the other day. It'll be things like that. And that's a veiled threat. And I'll give you things to do with that. Yeah. Dehumanization is the other piece. And dehumanization, oftentimes, you can actually...
People start threatening my family like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is wrong. It's incredibly
They
wrong.
just probed you and found out something.
Yep. No way. Family is off the marker. You don't mess with anybody's family. But the dehumanization is the other piece. And it's interesting because with dehumanization, you can actually hear it. When we do a risk assessment or a threat assessment, I actually want the exact words that an individual said, or I want to watch them on video so I can actually see and hear word for word what they said. And not because it makes us feel bad and it hurts somebody's feelings and it's provoking an emotion from somebody, because it's actually because I can tell where their brain is going down the cycle of violence. So I can actually tell where they're headed. And what we'll see is a switch from abusive verbiage into assaultive verbiage, or derogatory verbiage. Abusive verbiage is, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm going to use generalities and I'm not going to have the best mouth. But abusive verbiage is, I pay all of your salaries. Somebody's probably heard that. I pay your salary, and y'all are real jerks. You're power hungry and you're all jerks. That's abusive, an initial phase, right? The lighter end of things, kind of. Now, if we switch it into derogatory verbiage, what do you then hear? And really what this is probably a switch into personalization, which is, but you know what? You're a real fill in the blank with a word, name calling, typically, not a term of endearment. What have they done? Do you see the switch? From a you all down to but you're a real piece of fill in the blank. And what I'm doing is I'm dehumanizing you. And dehumanization is scary because what people then are doing in their head is they're turning you into a piece of meat. So if you're ever name called by someone, they're actually dehumanizing you. So that's the one we want to watch for because that's a progression in the brain toward violence. So we want to pay attention to that.
That's the one that I wouldn't be as worried about.
Right. Yeah, because it wouldn't bother you. You wouldn't be provoked by that or angered by that. And that's good, because I don't think about that either. I'm not so worried about, okay, you made me angry or you name called or whatever. That doesn't hurt me so much. What bothers me is that I can see where your head is going. What we've actually found in some of these shootings, and it's pretty disturbing, is that prior to an individual engaging and actually shooting a target, a lot of times they will mimic, which is another form of dehumanization, name call and mimic the victim. And the victim may even be begging for their lives, please don't kill me, please don't shoot me. And the individual will say, he'll call them a name typically, and then they'll say, please don't kill me, please don't shoot me, and the trigger will be pulled. Because you'll actually see, do you see that dehumanization? And if you're ever mimicked by another adult, the hair on the back of your neck should stand up. Mimicked by kids, not so much, they're not gonna kill you, at least not right now. Maybe slowly, just with life, right? But if you ever have somebody do that, that's problematic because it's what's happening in their brain that I'm more worried about. Because before we engage in an act of violence, we do have to turn people into a piece of meat. The video on the Santa Barbara shooting, when you hear him talk, did you hear what he said about women? Anybody who watched that video, how horrible, they were all filthy sluts and they needed to be punished. And because they hurt him, he was now going to hurt them. He was going to devastate them. He would destroy them all. But he talks about how nasty it is because women wouldn't date him. I wonder why. But they wouldn't date him, and so he was upset about that. But you can actually hear all of the dehumanization. But it's pretty profound, actually. That's what's really disturbing about that. So you'll get that. Now, I'm going to go quickly. This is probably the fastest I've ever done this, so I know I'm skipping things, and if I do, somebody just slow me down, okay? So 10 tips. Number 1, if anybody broadcasts it, you believe it. So if anybody says, you know what, I'm going to come down there. I'm going to come back. I'm going to figure out where you live, and I'm going to mess with you at your house or your place of business. If they broadcast it, even if it's a veiled threat, I'd hate to see we actually believe it, and it's then up to them to prove that they didn't mean it. 0 tolerance for threats, period. And that should be everywhere. We urge that, a 0 tolerance threat policy, period. That's it. Skip the tea leaf reading. We don't want to tea leaf read or make a guesstimation about, well, that's just so-and-so. And we do that a lot. We'll say, well, that's just so-and-so, that's just their behavior, they've done that forever, that's no big deal. When we say just, what are we doing? We're justifying a behavior and then we're making it normal, right? We're also allowing a boundary probe to occur, which can then actually add fuel to the fire and up the ante. So we're seeing those things. In the world of violence, we don't want to do that. So we're not going to tea leaf read. Another one we do, well, no, I'm going to get to that. I'll still get to that. If a coded behavior occurs, go to a countermeasure. Remember the coded behaviors, normal, boundary probe, all of those behaviors. Let's take a look at them. Attack-related behavior, what's occurring, and if any of those happen, what are our countermeasures going to be? And you guys as a board should come up with what your countermeasure should be. If somebody violates this, then what would our countermeasure be here? If this individual becomes upset or becomes whatever, what would our countermeasure then be? What are some of the things that we want to do? What are the steps, right? And we have different steps for countermeasures. And I'm going to see, here we go. We call them trees, actually. Cleverly named category 1, 2, and 3, but we call them trees. And trees are, anybody ski or snowboard? Maybe, yeah, you go skiing, you go snowboarding, you go down the greens, it's a good run, you hop onto the blues, still a solid run, you hop onto the blacks, and you hit a tree, right? What do you do after you hit the tree?
Kick the tree.
Besides pick up your stuff, get angry, be embarrassed, have a yard sale.
Blame it on the trail.
Right, but do you go back down it again? Some people might. I would not. In fact, I may back up and I may say, you know, I think I'm going to stick with the blues for the rest of today because that hurt, right? So that's a tree. So what we want you guys to develop are trees. Some of the easy trees are questioning, confronting, and consequences. Now here's the deal with trees though. You can't use the same level over and over again. And you have your own trees too. An interruption saying, you know what, your time is up. Some other small trees that you may use. If you use that tree once and you notice that they actually just climb over it and keep going anyway, what have you learned? We don't use the same level of tree again, right? We actually have to up the ante and we've got to go to a bigger tree. So that when they get slapped by that, it hurts a little bit more and they actually will rethink their actions and back off. So part of the analysis that we do when we do a threat or risk assessment on anybody is we actually take a look at what were the consequences, what was implemented, what trees did they try, and what was the response? Did the individual climb right over it and keep going? Or have they been stuck at the same level of tree? Maybe they've never tried a bigger tree, and we need to try a bigger tree. So we actually take a look at what their response was to the trees that were also laid down, which is handy. Parents do that sometimes. You ever been to a Red Robin and their kids are all hopped up on Mountain Dew and parents are trying to get them to sit down and they say, sit down, right? Like over and over again. That's all the same level of tree, right? So then they up the ante, and this is interesting. They'll say, sit down, I mean it, right? What did you just train your child?
You didn't mean it before.
Yeah, first 2 times I was just kidding. And do the kids usually sit down even then? No. And parents get weirder, right? They'll actually up the ante further and they'll say, sit down. You are embarrassing me. I will take you out to the car. You know what? I'm going to count to 10. And then they'll start counting. They'll even get up to 8 or 9. They'll switch into 9 1/2, 9 3/4, right? Just sit your kid down, right?
It's like you're following my family around.
But that level of tree is not working, right? So if you want it to work, you actually have to up the ante. You have to...
Somebody else to carry them out.
Yeah, you could do that too. Have somebody else carry them out. You bet. But the goal is that you've got to come up with a bigger tree. Veiled threats, a really good one for veiled threats is the questioning. What do you mean by that? Help me understand what you mean by that. That's a good one. Can I help you? I'm sorry, can you state that again? That sure sounded like X, A, B, or C. That's just questioning. Questioning lets people know that you're on to that initial boundary probe or on to that initial inappropriate behavior, and some people will stop right there. If they don't, then we're going to go up to the next one, which is the confronting tree. Look, here are our rules, here are our policies, here's what we have to do, and this needs to stop. And you can wait, and if that doesn't work, you can pick it up to the next one, and you can go to the consequence, which is if you don't do this, then this will be the consequence. We will have to have you removed. You can repeat that, but I would only repeat myself twice. Say it once, be clear, say it one more time, and then make it so. Those are ACT guidelines. After you say it twice, make it happen. I'm going to back up so you have a couple of the other tips to be fair. Don't insert the word just in a behavioral description. If you ever hear the word just, look at this one. Oh, it's probably just some harmless teenage phase he's going through. We got Harrison Klebold, blow up your school, kill them all, right? If you ever hear somebody say just, that one makes me listen harder. Like, go ahead, justify that behavior because it was probably inappropriate and we either don't want to do anything about it, we're concerned about doing something about it, but we probably should. So listen for that magic word. Focus on what, not who. This is vitally important. We focus on what, not who. What behavior is the individual engaged in, not who they are, what they look like. If we do a who, we're actually profiling, and we'll probably be wrong. So we don't want to profile the who's. Who could be a mental health diagnosis, who could be how someone looks or appears. That can be a who. We don't want to do those. We want to do what behavior are you engaged in. When we behavioralize things, we can't go wrong because we can specifically identify an inappropriate behavior. So those are the big ones there. Always interrupt or disrupt the behavior. Always do it. If you don't, you move from observation into reinforcement. And we don't want you to turn into a reinforcer. We don't want you to accidentally reinforce anything inappropriate. One way that we do that a lot of times in our personal lives is we head nod when we actually don't agree with somebody. Or like, yeah, so we did this. Law enforcement, sometimes we'll get into that. You're listening to somebody and you're trying to demonstrate active listening skills and you're head nodding when they're saying something horrific or that what they'd like to do to somebody or like to pound on somebody and they'll head nod. Watch that because that can also be an accidental reinforcer. So, but always interrupt or disrupt behavior. Here's our countermeasures. Tip 6, immediately place a tree after each practice session. So boundary probes are one thing. A practice session is similar to a boundary probe. What we'll actually see with folks who are planning a violent act, particularly a larger violent act, is that they will actually practice it first. One of the cases that we've reviewed and actually John consulted with was a case involving a post office somewhere in the country. And at this post office, an individual shows up wanders around the post office, has no business there whatsoever, but just makes himself known. And he hangs out for about a half an hour on the first day, right? Second day, he comes back. This time he's back, and he's oddly dressed. In fact, kind of suit and tie, tuxedo-ish kind of outfit. Wanders around for another half an hour. People don't say anything to him, and he hangs out for about half an hour. Then he goes home. Third day, he comes back again. This time he comes back, and it's interesting. Now he's dressed in kind of Hawaiian garb, and he has a floaty wrapped around him. One of those children's floaties, like a little waist floaty, wrapped around him. Wanders around for more than an hour this day. No one says anything to him. No one confronts him. No one talks to him. Nothing. He comes back the fourth day, and this day he actually comes back with his golf clubs, or what looks like golf clubs. Unfortunately, within that case was not golf clubs, but weapons. Do you see the practice behavior? He's practicing what's going to happen, but he's also boundary probing to see if anyone will say anything. We also do a similar version, which is kind of interesting because it's really scary. In some of our different agencies and businesses across the state, we'll go in and we'll actually do an insertion. And an insertion means we'll actually go up to the building and we'll do a workplace violence type training later in the afternoon. But in the morning, we'll actually see where within their building we can get. Where can I achieve my presence in their building? We may leave little stickers. I may take pictures of things. I may take things off their desk. But we'll actually insert ourselves into the buildings to determine how safe they are. And how many buildings and how many offices and restricted areas and access coded doors and everything else, how many of those do you think I get into? All of them. Why? I'm innocuous. Right? And people tend to do the who versus the what, right? And I actually go in and I've got a bunch of name tags and I'll throw a purse over me and I keep a Starbucks and I'll have my cell phone in the other hand and I'll look exceptionally busy and like I can't get a door and I can't get to my tags. And could you please hold that door for me? I'd really appreciate it. Oh, it's my first day and I have no idea where I'm headed. I think I came in the, am I in the back door? Right? And I know my door jams. I've got about 4 seconds on certain doors. I've got lots of things, so I learn where I can get quickly, and it's amazing where I can get in insertions. And when we go and we do the stuff in the afternoon after we're found out, people are so frustrated. They're almost angry at me. Why did you do that? Why do you look so nice? Why do you ask for my help? And I said, because that's how I knew I'd get in there, and you were doing a who, not a what. If you were doing a what, I had no business being there. You didn't ask for my tags, you didn't ask for my information. It was what behavior was I engaged in. One time I got all screwed up and I went into the men's bathroom because I was terrified. I'm from Iowa. I don't steal things. I don't do things wrong. I'm very rule bound. It was confusing. It was my first one. John Nicoletti shoved me through a back door and there were like 20 people standing there when I came in the back. And I was so anxious that I got all confused. They still let me go. They just thought I was confused and got lost and couldn't read or something. I don't know what they were thinking, right? But they should have watched my behavior because I was clearly lost, I was clearly stressed, I was clearly not where I was supposed to be. And anybody could have come up and said, can I help you? Level 1 tree, questioning, can I help you? And nobody did it. So those are the things we're talking about there. When a tree is placed, folks have a choice to either back off or climb over it. If they climb over it, we just need the bigger tree. Remember, if you allow any behaviors that have deviated from normal to occur without a disruptor, then by your actions you are saying the behavior's okay. Redundancy, beating it to death, really important. Make sure you understand the difference between the event threshold and the event horizon. Threshold is when they're on your radar, horizon is when you're being attacked. When they come on your radar, you have to start developing a plan to mitigate that threat or that risk. And what it may entail for you guys is 5 minutes at the end of the night saying, okay, things went relatively smooth. Anybody pop up on anybody's radar? Or does anybody have a concern or have any letters been mailed to the city or have we had this or that? What should we do? Let's take a look at it. Do you guys have a TVAT team, like a Vortex or a Threat and Violence Assessment team? I know law enforcement probably is more that team. Sometimes what we'll actually do is help folks set up a vortex or a threat and violence assessment team. And really what that is that anytime a threat occurs, everybody takes information and you funnel it through one source, one vortex. So if you have, an unusual situation maybe here, and let's say somebody gets an unusual email or a death threat, or something, they actually start filtering it all the way through this vortex and this group of folks who has been selected and trained in violence assessment to actually review it, take a look at it, and make some decisions about how they're going to mitigate it. And that team can involve law enforcement, it can involve you guys, managers, it can involve lots of folks. So those are pretty important. So that vortex and a threat and violence assessment team is actually a pretty slick thing. Because here's one thing, if you look back at some of the shootings and some of the school incidents, a big piece is that you'll notice that they look like isolated incidents, some of these precursors, like even Columbine type stuff, right? We've got an English teacher who saw this report being written. We've got a parent who's concerned. We've got a kid who heard something different. We've got, and you see how all these little pieces, if you leave them individually, it looks like an isolated incident of, well, that's just whomever. But when you filter them all through a vortex and you actually take a look at it, you may have a concern, you may have a concern, you may have a concern, and all of a sudden, now we've got a nice radar picture. Now it's okay, now how are we going to mitigate this? What do we want to do to resolve this risk? So those are things that you can kind of think of. Is that something that we would want to put together? Is it something that we would want to consider just in our overall safety so we can start consolidating our data? If the individual is an insider, there's usually plenty of time between the event threshold and the event horizon to actually interrupt the event, if they're an insider. And don't get me wrong, insider events happen all the time, but it happens all the time because we avoid or we dismiss or we do the, well, yes, it was just so-and-so being so-and-so. They just snapped. No, they don't. People say that all the time. So-and-so just snapped. What does that mean? Right? Do synaptic gaps in the brain just give way and people lose it? No, they've built up to it. And we can see it in almost all of those incidents of violence that we've seen, kind of the Avenger-related violence where someone feels incredibly wronged by someone. You'll actually see because they have to avenge. They actually have to explain their story and they give gobs of information. And it's all precursors up to, but we miss it. Kind of like when we catch a serial killer and we interview the neighbor to the serial killer. What do the neighbors always say about the serial killer?
Nice guy.
Right? Such a nice guy. Lights were on late at night in the basement. Children would go in. They wouldn't come out, right? Fertile yard, all sorts of things. But they think they're really great people. And they're not. We've missed it. So those are things we need to actually pay attention to. Those are things we actually have to watch. Because we can interrupt those. 9, don't worry alone or make a unilateral risk assessment. Don't worry alone, that's where the threat and violence risk, kind of assessment team comes into play, or at least reporting it. If something's weird, if something's out of the ordinary, if somebody's hanging around too long, if they're waiting in the parking lot, if you notice them at a location that you're at where they shouldn't be, pay attention to that. Watch your surroundings and don't worry alone. Tell someone so that it can go into the vortex mix. And be careful making unilateral risk assessments. If you say, well, I know that person and I know that they're fine. Be very careful with that. And in fact, make sure that someone does an actual risk assessment. Not a mental health evaluation, not a, well, they seemed really nice, because we're doing a who instead of a what. Do you remember? So it really goes back to, okay, what behaviors do I have? What are the concerns here? We have issues. If you see something or hear something, say something. Now, I have to be honest, John actually added an 11th to the top 10 tips, so we'll throw that one in too. Here are some of the biggest options should things go excessively wrong. No, he didn't have that last one. First one is get out. I mean, if something in here actually becomes a little bit more violent, if you can get out and get away, you want to get out and get away. A lot of the safety and self-defense training, a lot of the things that we do on the side or in addition to, we actually trained a couple hundred folks from Arapahoe Douglas Mental Health here on some safety self-defense on how to get out and get away. Because getting out and getting away is going to be your best survival rate. The other one is hide out, safe room, or concealment. If you can hide, if you can get away quick enough to conceal, conceal. Other option is to fake out or play dead. Now what I will say about that is there is a condition must happen, right? Which is someone already has to be injured, right? We can't possum it and just pass out and hope they think we're dead and died of some heart attack or something. We actually have to have somebody already injured. And those are tough situations, but they do encourage survival. Department of DOT, CDOT, we've had various situations in meetings where folks have actually been injured and other folks actually played dead and they survived it. The other option is a takeout option. The truth of it is your law enforcement are responsible for that, which is good. But if it comes to that and you have no options, you have to fight back. Violence has molded into something much more scary than even what it was 10 years ago. Before, if someone hijacked a plane, what would you do? Write it to Cuba, right? Eventually they'll find your plane, eventually they'll come and get you and it'll all be fine. Now, what if somebody hijacks your plane? Big problem. You better fight, because if you don't, you'll actually be assisted to the ground by our government. They will assist you to the ground so that the casualties are fewer than what it would be. So as violence morphs and as things change, we have to change with it. And part of it is this training, part of it is saying, okay, maybe this is just a good thing to start jogging our memory of how do we start mitigating things. Maybe we need to nip down on boundary probes. Maybe we need to pay attention to folks who are escalating, and I can see that they're reactive. If they become reactive and they deviate from their baseline, we probably need to slow it down. If we put one tree in front of them and they step over it, let's have a secondary tree. What's our first tree? What's our second tree? But have some of those things pre-planned and ready to go, because they may happen. And again, the pre-planning, when we're prepared, we don't have to be scared. At least we have a plan put in place. If you don't have a plan at all, the brain will actually go into complete panic, where we'll end up with either no action, kind of a freeze response, or a reaction. And we would prefer you don't have a reaction. We'd prefer you actually have a response. A response is well thought out. It means that your brain already did some anticipatory thinking and you did if-then. Law enforcement do it all the time, in every situation they're ever in. If this happens, then this. If this happens, then this. If someone came in and they had a weapon, then this would be the response. But when you do that, the brain actually provides a pathway, and the brain will actually say, yep. So when you run to the filing cabinet of, holy cow, I've got this, and what do I do with it? It'll flip out the next filing cabinet, and boom, I've got this, and then you will act. But if you've never thought about it even one time, when your brain runs to the filing cabinet, guess what? There is nothing there. So what will happen is usually a freeze response or a knee-jerk reaction, which is why we do lockdown stuff for our kids. What we ended up seeing in the school shootings is that kids were actually running right by doors that could have gotten them out and ensured their safety, but they ran right by it because they reacted. Now we teach them to respond. Where are your doors? Where are your outlets? How do you lock down your room? How do you find a safe room that is closed and locked and has no windows? How could you do that? And we actually train them on it, and they do great. In fact, kids do better than adults do. But those are some of the things we need to think about. And for you guys, maybe a TVAT team or something like that, so that you can kind of review things that may be concerning as they come in, but those could be good things too. All right, 9:05. Whew. Right? 4 hours and 1. Powered it out. What are your thoughts? Is it helpful? I know it's kind of a lot of information in a very short time frame, and I pounded it in. Are there questions that you have, or certain instances or things that you're thinking, you know, what about this? Yeah.
I notice you don't have to talk them out of it.
Right.
You don't have to talk them down.
Yeah. Sometimes.
Repeat that for the people at home that can't hear.
Yeah, he said, I noticed that you didn't say talk them down. And it's interesting. So what we'll actually try initially when we see folks is that we want to stop some of that boundary probing. But in stopping some of the boundary probing, we can try verbal de-escalation. You can try to de-escalate, you can try to calm, and usually in de-escalation, you just need to state an understanding of the individual's emotional state so that they feel understood. I think especially a lot of people that may come here want to be understood, and when they're not, that can actually create some of the reactivity. So if you can verbally de-escalate, use your verbal de-escalation skills, which we could give a whole nother class on, which would last at least another 2 hours, but we could do verbal de-escalation. Now, talk them out of the act. The hard part is that what we found is that when folks come in who are pre-planned, the proactive violence, is that they are so planned out that they will not backtrack. The other thing is how can they save face if they come in here, threaten violence, or whip out a weapon of some kind? How do you save face after that? Has anybody seen the, what's the movie? Tommy Boy? Has anybody seen Tommy Boy when he walks into the bank strapped up with fake bombs? And the minute everybody freaks out, he's like, no, I was just kidding, right? And everybody drops, the security guy throws his weapon at him, like they were all, no, I was just kidding. There's no just kidding. You actually can't rewind it once you do it, and saving face is a huge deal. The other thing that we've seen with Avengers is they want to go out in a big way. They don't want to be dismissed either. For a lot of them. A couple instances are different. But I would actually try verbal de-escalation if you could do it. Yeah.
Council, other questions?
Yeah.
One of the slides that you skipped through was why Colorado. I'm just intrigued.
Yeah. And it's not Colorado specifically. We more use that as a talking point to figure out why is this happening. A couple of the things that we've actually seen from our end of the spectrum is that right now we've got some pretty considerable mental health numbers of folks who have mental health conditions. Our weather is relatively okay, particularly Denver and areas. We have multiple resources for folks, so we actually have people flocking to our city. The population is increasing due to our new marijuana laws. All over the place. People are vacationing here, they want to live here, they want to be here, you name it. And prescription drug medication, prescription medication use and abuse. We actually have higher rates of that. We're like in the top 5. I think we might even be, I don't know, we're right up there for prescription drugs that are being prescribed. They did a study in Denver proper between 2007 and 2010, and they looked at hydrocodone and oxycodone prescriptions, and what they found about those medications in any 3-month period, guess how many prescriptions were written in any 3-month period? Just in Denver proper, none of the surroundings. 80,000. 80,000 prescriptions for oxycodone and hydrocodone. When they did their Take Back initiative, they pulled in 35,000 pounds of unused medication. We have folks medicating for everything. And this is kind of the state. Unfortunately, I think some of the marijuana stuff has encouraged, hey, come here, medicate. So we end up with some issues. And not that marijuana has been linked to a lot of our stuff, but that self-medication piece has been bad here. So I think that's been bad. The other thing is that as our economies had really rough downturns, we have not done well. And I joke, but I'm serious about it too. We all have a little bit of crazy. It just depends on how much you got and how bad it gets under stress. We do. We all got a little bit of something. You add a bunch of stress to it, you add economic downturn, you add folks who are being terminated, who are losing their homes, and you're going to have gobs of self-medication, you're going to have gobs of people upset and angry, and it emanates everywhere. Shopping, going to the library, basic things. You've probably noticed people who are more irritated, agitated than ever before. So we see a lot of that.
Council reminder.
Yeah. Yep. Big, I think. Probably the full version of it.
Right. It's hard to, without being a trained psychologist, that you run into people of every psychological shade. I mean, there are a lot of people who are aggressive by nature, who will exhibit behavior that other people tend not to exhibit, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to move from that into a violent episode. They may or may not be more prone to it because maybe their aggression gets it out of their system, for all I know. I don't know. I really don't. I mean, this is the problem is, I mean, I think it's very interesting, but it's how does a layman gauge, okay, there's behavior being exhibited that's boundary probing, but that this episode of it is different than a past episode, notwithstanding it's gone on for a long time, or
Yeah, that's the tea leaf reading, and you actually don't have to. You guys just have to define what are acceptable behaviors, and what are not. And if it's an unacceptable behavior, when you feel that boundary probe, even for folks who tend to be a little bit more aggressive,
Yeah.
just in general, right? They're just aggressive. But we want to watch the behavior, because the behavior then will create that social and psychological disruption. You'll actually see it impinge on others. And when you try to put the tree, they'll either step over or they'll keep going. But you guys get to actually define what behaviors are normal and which ones are not for this
Right.
room. And for you guys, I think maybe it's a discussion of, you know what, do we allow threat making? Do we allow escalated volume and tone? Do we allow name calling? Do we allow, because those are actually behaviors. We can make it very behavioral. So you have to define which behaviors are acceptable and which ones are not acceptable. And that's a task for you guys to have to do. And it actually doesn't matter if it's been chronic or if it's acute. It doesn't even matter. The only thing that actually matters is, what are we seeing? What do we accept here? What do we not? It's very behavioral. And it doesn't even matter if their intentions are good or bad or whatever. That's the tea leaf reading. But we'll say, sometimes with mental health folks, well, they really didn't mean to. I know, I understand that, and I really understand mental health conditions, so I have a lot of empathy and even sometimes sympathy.
Right.
But the truth of it is it's behavior, because the behavior is going to kill me. So it's kind of defining that, and I know that it feels like this big space, but that could be a really great conversation for you guys to say, what behaviors are okay and which ones aren't? Which ones do we want to knit back on? Which ones do we want to allow? That's yours to decide. Yeah.
Okay.
Not a discussion for tonight yet.
Yes.
Because we're going to probably call time on this.
Yeah.
Um,
On the hook.
With this is, Dr. Brower, is there, it's in my mind, which is with absent a countermeasure that is given, sometimes folks will de-escalate on their own because they'll take their own countermeasure, kind of, that the health paths, but you have to assume absent a given countermeasure, things are going to keep moving not in a good direction.
Correct. It would be safer to assume that. And sometimes we call it interruption theory. If I place a countermeasure, was a violent act going to occur or was it never to occur at all? And I guess I rather interrupt and play on the safe side of things than run the risk that I got it wrong and then we end up sorry. And the other thing too is that for folks who are angry, just real quick, the folks who are angry and just, can naturally solve it on their own, some people want to come here and they just want to vent. If you give them 2 seconds and actually let them, anger vents naturally on its own. When they speak, you'll actually see them and their baseline will come right down. That's anger. If you ever watch somebody and the more they talk, the hotter they get, and you can actually see them start to deregulate, they'll get angrier and they'll start to lose it and they start to lose their regulation. That's when you actually need to interrupt it and stop it, which is more the de-escalation skills. But anger will vent naturally on its own, you just need to listen. But you'll actually see them de-escalate. If it's not anger, you'll actually see them get hotter and hotter, and you should interrupt it. If you don't interrupt it, then you end up with rageful folks, and folks who are rageful are out of control. And then they'll have to be removed.
And so if I'll try to summarize
Yes.
really high level.
Sure.
One is have a plan and acknowledge your thresholds.
Yep.
Understand your countermeasures, your tree,
Bingo.
and how those work. And for the broader proactive picture, it's having what you've referred to as vortex, and I'm going to presume the staff understands that better, but that's for us to maybe work our way through.
Absolutely. Bingo. Done and done.
So, thank you, Dr. Browser.
Yeah, thank you guys. I know that was kind of the quick and dirty version, but no one's asleep. No droolers yet, except me, maybe. Thank you, you guys.
Thank you. And council reminder, Thursday morning breakfast followed by walking tour, and that's the next up item. And thank you for your attentiveness, and if anyone needs a paper towel for their drooling, we'll take care of that. Thank you very much.